The vampire king watched in horror as the maid approached his cursed son. In the space between her heartbeat and his eternal stillness, a world frozen in twilight began to crack. What she didn't realize, she was the first living soul to touch him without vanishing from memory, and the broken king hiding behind the rotted oak would destroy heaven and hell both to understand why. It was never daylight in the woods of Eclipse Manor. The forest around the castle stood like cathedral pillars carved from bone and shadow, their gnarled branches weaving a canopy so dense that even moonlight struggled to pierce through. Mist clung to everything: the moss-slicked stones, the ancient trees, the air itself, as though the world had been holding its breath for so long it had forgotten how to exhale. Time did not move here, not truly. The same fog drifted through the same clearings, the same night birds called with the same mournful cry. Dawn never came. Dawn had been forbidden 73 years ago, on the night a father sealed his son's soul to save his life. In the heart of this perpetual dusk, Prince Marlowe sat upon a stone bench, worn smooth by centuries of rain that never quite fell. His small frame was draped in funeral finery, cream-colored silk embroidered with silver thread, lace spilling from his collar like frozen waterfalls. The fabric was too fine, too heavy, too formal for a child. But then, Prince Marlowe had not been a child for a very long time. His eyes were open, staring at nothing. His pale hands rested in his lap like broken porcelain. Moonlight caught in his white blonde hair, making him look less like a boy and more like a sculpture, something beautiful and terrible that belonged in a crypt, not a garden. He did not breathe, did not blink, did not move except when moved. The perfect prince, the cursed prince, the prince no one was allowed to touch. Behind a rotted oak tree 30 paces away, King Lark Eclipse stood in shadow and watched. He had been watching for 73 years. His long fingers gripped the tree's bark, pale knuckles pressing into moss and decay. Ivy twisted around his wrists like living shackles, but he didn't brush it away. He barely noticed. His entire focus was locked on the clearing ahead, where his son sat motionless and alone, where the new maid was walking toward him. No. The word formed in Lark's mind but never reached his lips. His jaw clenched so hard his teeth should have shattered. 6 centuries of immortality had taught him control, how to master hunger, rage, grief, every base impulse that mortality shed like snakeskin. But this was different. This was her. Genevieve's specter moved through the mist like a ghost in reverse, not pale and ethereal, but solid, real, achingly alive in a world of beautiful corpses. Her black uniform was simple, austere, buttoned to her throat with a white collar that seemed to glow against the fabric. Her dark hair was pinned back severely, not a strand out of place. But her face. Even from this distance, Lark could see the softness there. The way her brow furrowed with concern as she approached the boy. The way her steps slowed, gentled, as though she were approaching a wounded animal rather than the most dangerous creature in the kingdom. She didn't know. She couldn't know. 4 weeks she'd worked in Eclipse Manor. 4 weeks of silent meals served to courtiers who never ate, of beds made in rooms where no one slept, of candles lit in halls where darkness was a comfort, not a curse. 4 weeks, and she had never once asked why the prince sat alone in the woods every night. Until tonight. Turn back, Lark thought desperately, his fingers digging deeper into the bark. Turn back before you reach him, before you make the mistake that will erase you from existence itself. But she didn't turn back. She kept walking, one careful step after another, her breath misting white in the cold air, the only breath in the entire forest. Genevieve had been warned. "Do not go near the prince," the head chamberlain had hissed on her first day, her skeletal fingers gripping Genevieve's wrist with inhuman strength. "Do not speak to him. Do not look at him directly. And above all, do not touch him." "Why?" Genevieve had asked. The chamberlain's already pale face had gone white as death. She'd released Genevieve's wrist as though it had burned her. "Because," she'd whispered, "the ones who do are forgotten. By everyone, by history, by God himself. They simply cease." Genevieve had wanted to ask more, but the chamberlain had already fled, her footsteps echoing down the marble halls until even the echo disappeared. Forgotten. It was an odd word for a curse. Genevieve had expected something more dramatic: death, transformation, eternal suffering. The vampire courts were famous for their cruelty, after all, for their elaborate tortures and blood-soaked rituals. But forgotten? That seemed almost sad. Which was why, perhaps, she'd found herself drawn to the clearing night after night, watching from a distance as the prince sat alone, untouched, unseen, a boy carved from sorrow and moonlight. Tonight she'd brought fresh linens, an excuse, a lie she told herself even as her feet carried her past the tree line, into the mist, toward the child no one else would approach. The prince didn't react to her presence, didn't turn his head or acknowledge her in any way. He simply sat, hands folded, eyes open but unseeing. Up close, he looked even more like a doll. His skin was porcelain smooth, unmarred by scars or blemishes. His features were delicate, almost feminine, with high cheekbones and a small, perfect mouth. Beautiful in the way expensive things in glass cases are beautiful, untouchable. But there was something else, too, something the distance had hidden. A strand of hair had fallen across his face, catching on his lips. Such a small thing, barely worth noticing. And yet it bothered her, made her chest ache with a tenderness she didn't understand. "He's not a child," she reminded herself. "He's cursed, dangerous, forbidden." Her hand moved anyway. Lark's world stopped. He watched, helpless, paralyzed by horror and disbelief, as Genevieve's fingers reached toward his son's face. Time, which had already moved so slowly in this cursed place, seemed to stop entirely. No, no, no! The curse would recognize her warmth. It would sense the life thrumming through her veins, the human compassion radiating from her touch, and it would consume her, erase her, unmake her, as though she'd never existed. He'd seen it happen before. 73 years ago, on the night the curse first took hold, a nurse had tried to swaddle the newborn prince. Her fingers had barely brushed his skin before she'd gasped, not in pain, but in confusion. "Who am I?" she'd whispered, and then she was gone. Not dead, not transformed, simply absent. The other servants had blinked in confusion, already forgetting her face. Within an hour, no one remembered her name. Within a day, the space she'd occupied in the world had sealed over like water closing over a dropped stone. Complete erasure. Lark had spent the next 7 decades ensuring it never happened again. He'd built walls of protocol and fear around his son, made him untouchable, unreachable, safe. But now this woman, this human maid with her soft eyes and softer heart, was about to undo everything. And he couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't do anything but watch as her fingertips brushed the strand of white blonde hair and tucked it gently, so gently, behind Prince Marlowe's ear. The world didn't end. That was Genevieve's first thought. Her second was surprise at how cold the boy's skin felt, not dead cold, but winter cold, the cold of something sleeping. Her third thought vanished entirely, because the air changed. The mist stopped its endless drift. The night birds fell silent mid-cry. Even the whisper of wind through skeletal branches simply ceased, as though the forest itself had drawn a sharp breath and forgotten to release it. Genevieve's hand remained against the prince's cheek, her fingertips resting on skin smooth as marble and just as still. Then, movement. So slight she almost missed it. A tremor beneath her touch. Not a heartbeat. Something else. Something waking. The prince's silver eyes shifted, not rolling unconsciously, not the drift of a corpse left sitting upright, but focusing. Slowly, impossibly, his irises moved from their fixed position, staring at nothing until they locked onto her face. Genevieve's breath caught. His eyes were the color of drowned moons, huge and luminous, and aware in a way they hadn't been seconds before. They studied her with an intensity that made her skin prickle, made her want to pull away and lean closer all at once. Then his lips parted. The smallest gap, barely visible, but enough for a sound to escape. Broken, barely audible, like music boxes winding after centuries of silence. You. Genevieve's heart hammered against her ribs. Her hand trembled but didn't withdraw. The prince's eyes widened further. A flicker of something, recognition, confusion, wonder, passed across his porcelain features. Are real. Behind the oak tree, King Lark Eclipse felt his knees buckle. He gripped the bark to stay upright, his entire body shaking with an emotion he couldn't name. Terror, hope, grief, all of them and none of them. Because his son, his beautiful, broken, cursed son, had just spoken. For the first time in 73 years, Prince Marlowe had felt something. And the woman who'd done the impossible, who'd touched him without vanishing, who'd woken him from a sleep deeper than death, she was still there. Still real. Still alive. The curse hadn't taken her. Why? The question burned through Lark's mind like poison, like revelation, like the first ray of sunlight in decades trying to pierce his eternal night. Why her? Why now? What is she? And beneath those questions, another one, darker, more dangerous. What have I done? Because if Genevieve's specter could touch his son without consequence, it meant everything he'd believed about the curse was wrong. It meant 73 years of isolation, of keeping his child locked in living death, had been for nothing. Or worse, it meant the curse was changing, evolving, recognizing her. In the clearing, Genevieve slowly withdrew her hand from the prince's face. The boy's eyes followed her movement, wide and desperate, like a drowning man watching a lifeline pulled away. "I'm sorry," she whispered, though she didn't know what she was apologizing for. "I didn't mean to." The prince's small hand shot out with startling speed, wrapping around her wrist. His grip was gentle but firm, desperate. "Please," his silver eyes seemed to say, "please don't leave me alone again." And in that moment, Genevieve understood. He wasn't cursed. He was trapped. Behind them, hidden in shadow and ivy, King Lark Eclipse pressed his forehead against the rotted oak and closed his eyes. The forbidden touch had been given. The sleeping prince had awakened. and the maid who should have been forgotten was still very much alive. The world Lark had spent 73 years carefully constructing was beginning to crack, and he had no idea whether what lay beneath would save them or destroy everything. The whispers started before dawn, or what would have been dawn if Eclipse Manor remembered such things. Genevieve felt them follow her through the servants' corridors like cold breath on her neck. The other maids stepped aside when she passed, their conversations dying mid-sentence, resuming only after she'd turned the corner. Words drifted back to her in fragments. Touched him directly. Still here, still breathing. Unnatural, that's what it is. By the time she reached the linen closet for her morning duties, the silence had grown teeth. "You're late." Head Chamberlain Morvain stood in the doorway, her skeletal frame draped in black silk that whispered with her movements. Unlike most of the manor's upper staff, Morvain was not human. Her pale skin had the translucent quality of something that had never seen sunlight, and her eyes, colorless as winter ice, held the flat affect of the very old undead. "My apologies, Chamberlain. Do not speak unless addressed with a question." Morvain's voice was soft, which somehow made it worse. "You will attend to the guest chambers in the north wing today, all 15 of them, alone." Genevieve's stomach sank. The north wing housed the visiting courtiers, the ancient nobility who came to pay respects to the Eclipse throne. 15 rooms meant 15 encounters with vampires who would view her as either prey or entertainment, or both. "Yes, Chamberlain." "And Spectre?" Morvain stepped closer, near enough that Genevieve could smell the faint scent of grave dirt and old roses that clung to her. "The courtiers are curious about you, about how a simple housemaid managed to do what 73 years of protocol has prevented. I suggest you provide them with no further reasons for curiosity. Do you understand?" "Yes, Chamberlain." Morvain's lips curved into something that might have been a smile on a living face. On hers, it looked like a crack in marble. "Good, because the king values order above all else. And you, my dear, have introduced chaos into a house that has known only stasis for nearly a century. I wonder how long he'll tolerate that." She swept away, silk rustling like dead leaves. Genevieve stood alone in the corridor, her hands trembling as she gathered the cleaning supplies. Through the narrow window, she could see the eternal twilight that blanketed the manor grounds. The same mist, the same shadows, the same skeletal trees reaching toward a sky that never changed. 73 years of the same moment, repeating endlessly. And she'd cracked it with a single touch. The north wing was worse than she'd imagined. The guest chambers were lavish in the way of things left too long untouched. Velvet curtains thick with dust, gilded mirrors reflecting nothing, 4-poster beds that had never been slept in by anything that needed sleep. The courtiers who occupied these rooms during their stays were elsewhere during the day, attending to whatever business the undead conducted when the living weren't watching. But their presence lingered. Genevieve felt eyes on her as she worked, though the rooms were empty. The portraits on the walls seemed to track her movements. Twice, she heard whispered laughter from corridors she'd just confirmed were vacant. In the 7th chamber, she found a message written in the dust on a side table. "The curse remembers." She wiped it away with shaking hands. In the 11th chamber, the door locked behind her. She spent 20 minutes rattling the handle before it suddenly opened on its own, revealing an empty hallway and the faint scent of amusement. If amusement had a smell, it would be this, cold and sharp and cruel. By the time she reached the 15th chamber, her nerves were worn to threads. This room was different from the others, smaller, simpler. The furniture was old, but well-maintained, and fresh moonbloom roses stood in a vase by the window, their silver petals glowing softly in the dim light, like the one she'd found on her pillow. Genevieve approached the flowers slowly, her heartbeat loud in the silence. A card was tucked among the stems, written in the same careful child's handwriting, "Do you dream of fire?" Her blood went cold. She did dream of fire. Every night since arriving at Eclipse Manor, she'd woken gasping from nightmares of forests burning, of screams swallowed by smoke, of a woman with her face cradling an infant soaked in blood. How could he know? A sound made her spin toward the door, but the corridor beyond remained empty, just the eternal whisper of the manor settling, or perhaps breathing. It was hard to tell the difference in a place this old. Genevieve pocketed the card and finished her work quickly, her hands moving on instinct while her mind churned. The prince had somehow left his clearing, entered the manor, found her room, and left a rose on her pillow. He'd written notes. He was aware in ways the curse supposedly prevented, which meant either the curse was breaking or it had never worked the way everyone believed. Or, and this thought made her skin prickle, it was working exactly as intended, and she was the final piece it had been waiting for. The servants' dinner was a subdued affair. 20 humans and half-humans gathered in the kitchen, eating thin soup and hard bread, while the vampire courtiers above feasted on whatever it was they feasted on. Genevieve had learned not to ask. She sat at the far end of the long table, aware of the sidelong glances from the others. Only Thomas, the groundskeeper, met her eyes directly, and his expression was more assessing than friendly. "You're still here," he said finally, his voice gravelly from decades of breathing the manor's cold air. "So it would seem. That bothers people, I've noticed." Thomas took a long drink from his cup, water, though several of the others had something stronger. The last person to touch the prince lasted 3 hours before she vanished. Didn't even make it to sunset. Her name was... He trailed off, his brow furrowing. "You can't remember," Genevieve said softly. "No, none of us can. That's how it works. The curse doesn't just take you. It takes every memory of you, every record, every—" He stopped, his weathered face going pale. "Except you're still here, still remembered. Which means you're either blessed or damned, girl, and I can't figure which." "Neither can I." Meredith, seated across from them, leaned forward. Her face was pinched with something between fear and fascination. "Is it true you heard him hum?" The table went silent. Genevieve's soup spoon paused halfway to her mouth. "What?" "The prince, last night. Old Garrett swears he heard humming coming from the gardens. Said it sounded like a child's voice, which is impossible because the prince hasn't made a sound in 73 years. Garrett's half-deaf and fully drunk most nights," someone muttered. But what if he's not wrong? Meredith's eyes were bright with the kind of hunger that comes from living in a place where nothing ever changes. What if the curse is breaking? What if she's... "Enough." Thomas's voice cracked like a whip. "We don't speculate about curses or princes or anything else beyond our station. That's how people get forgotten. Understood?" Murmurs of assent circled the table, but Meredith caught Genevieve's eye and mouthed a single word: "Careful." That night, Genevieve dreamed. She stood in a forest that was and wasn't the grounds of Eclipse Manor. The trees were the same skeletal shapes, but they burned, flames climbing bark and branch, turning twilight into hellish noon. Smoke choked the air, thick and acrid. In the center of the burning forest, a woman knelt. She wore Genevieve's face, but older, harder. Her dark hair hung loose around her shoulders, and her dress was the style of 70 years past. Simple homespun cloth, now stained with ash and blood. In her arms, she held an infant. The baby was silent, too silent. Its tiny body was wrapped in cloth that had once been white, but was now soaked crimson. The woman rocked it gently, humming a melody that made Genevieve's chest ache with recognition. The lullaby, the same one she'd heard the prince humming. "Please," the woman whispered to the burning sky. "Please, I'll give anything, anything." The flames roared higher, and from the fire a voice spoke, ancient and vast and terrible. "Blood calls to blood. Death calls to death. What is given cannot be taken back. What is promised must be paid." The woman looked up, tears cutting clean lines through the ash on her face. "Then take it. Take my blood, my death, my everything. Just let him live. Let him live." The infant in her arms stirred, drew breath, screamed, and the forest. Genevieve woke, gasping, her nightgown soaked with sweat despite the room's chill. Her hands trembled as she lit the oil lamp, casting trembling light across familiar walls. Just a dream. But her wrist tingled where the prince had gripped it, and when she looked down she saw faint silver marks on her skin. Not bruises, something else, like frost in the shape of small fingers. The curse remembers. She remembered Morvaine's message in the dust. No, not Morvaine's message. The curses. She didn't plan to go to him. That was what Genevieve told herself as she slipped out of her room, into the servants' corridors, through the hidden passages that led to the manor's oldest wings. She was just checking, just making sure he was still in the garden, still safe, still what? Still cursed? Still trapped? The prince's private chamber was in the south tower, accessible through a spiral staircase worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. Genevieve had cleaned it once, under Morvaine's watchful eye, and the memory of that room haunted her. The small bed that had never been slept in, the toys arranged with museum precision, the window that overlooked the clearing where he spent every night. The door was unlocked. That should have been her first warning. Genevieve pushed it open slowly, the hinges silent as secrets. The room beyond was exactly as she remembered, frozen in time like everything else in this cursed place. Moonlight spilled through the window, painting everything in shades of silver and shadow. In the corner, beside the window, stood a figure. Not the prince. Taller, broader, draped in darkness that seemed to move with a life of its own. "I was wondering when you would come," said King Lark Eclipse, his voice like midnight given sound. Genevieve's breath caught. She should run, should flee back to the servants' quarters and pray he forgot this transgression. But the king stepped into the moonlight, and she saw his face, sharp and beautiful and terrible in the way of things that have lived too long and lost too much. His eyes were the same silver as his son's, but where Marlowe's held desperate hope, Lark's held only exhausted rage. "Close the door," he said softly. "We have much to discuss, you and I, starting with why you carry my grandmother's blood in your veins, and why the curse she created recognizes you as its key." Genevieve's hand found the doorframe, the only thing keeping her upright as the world tilted. His grandmother's blood. The curse she created. The woman in her dream. The one with her face cradling a dying infant. Not a dream at all. A memory. The king smiled without warmth. "Yes, I see you're beginning to understand. Good." because in 3 nights the curse will complete its cycle, and you will have a choice to make. Save my son and doom yourself, or walk away and let him sleep forever." He moved closer, each step deliberate. "So tell me, Genevieve Spectre, descendant of the seer who cursed my bloodline, which will you choose?" The door swung shut behind her with a sound like a coffin closing. And in the garden below, Prince Marlowe stopped humming and smiled into the darkness, because after 73 years of waiting, the pieces were finally falling into place. "You don't understand what you've done." King Lark Eclipse's voice filled the chamber like smoke, seeping into every corner, every shadow. He stood between Genevieve and the door, his tall frame draped in black velvet that seemed to absorb the moonlight rather than reflect it. His silver eyes, so like his son's, yet so terribly different, fixed on her with an intensity that made her want to disappear. But she didn't, couldn't. Her legs had forgotten how to move. Genevieve's throat was dry. "I didn't mean to cause— Do you know how many people have touched my son since the night he was born?" Lark's question was soft, almost gentle. The gentleness made it worse. 7. 7 mortal souls reached out to comfort a child, to care for him, to show him the simple kindness that any infant deserves. He moved closer, each step measured and precise. The first was his wet nurse. She lasted 4 hours. The second was a physician who believed science could overcome superstition. He lasted 2. The 3rd through 7th were servants, kind-hearted fools who thought a curse was merely words, that compassion could shield them from consequence. Lark stopped an arm's length away. This close, Genevieve could see the fine lines around his eyes, the only sign of age on his ageless face. Not physical age, the exhaustion of centuries. "They're all gone now. Not dead. Death would be kinder. They're forgotten, erased from history as though they never drew breath. Their families don't mourn them because they don't remember them. The world sealed over the spaces they occupied like water closing over stones." His voice dropped to a whisper. "Can you imagine it? To not just die, but to have never existed at all? To be unmade so completely that even God has no record of your soul?" Genevieve's hands trembled. She pressed them against her sides, trying to still them. "Then why am I still here?" "An excellent question. One I've spent the last 3 days trying to answer." Lark turned away, moving to the window that overlooked the gardens. Below, in the clearing, the stone bench sat empty. At first I thought perhaps the curse had finally exhausted itself. 73 years is a long time, even for blood magic. Perhaps it had simply faded. But you don't believe that? No. He didn't turn around. Because curses don't fade. They fulfill themselves, or they wait for the conditions of their fulfillment. And yours is not a random presence, Genevieve Spectre. Your bloodline has been waiting for this moment as certainly as I've been dreading it. The name, her surname, suddenly felt heavy, dangerous. "I don't understand." "No, you wouldn't. How could you?" Lark's reflection in the window glass was sharp as a knife. "Tell me, do you dream?" The question caught her off guard. "Everyone dreams." "Do you dream of fire?" The woman in the burning forest, the infant soaked in blood, the desperate bargain offered to flames and darkness. Her silence was answer enough. Lark turned, and now his face held something that might have been pity on a gentler creature. On him, it looked like grief wearing a human mask. "Your ancestor," he said quietly, "was a seer. A woman named Elspeth Spectre, who served in my court 74 years ago." She was kind, talented, loyal. My wife adored her. When we learned we would have a child, the first eclipse heir born in 3 centuries, Elspeth wept with joy. He moved to a cabinet against the wall, withdrawing a crystal decanter filled with dark liquid. Blood or wine, Genevieve couldn't tell which. He poured himself a measure but didn't drink, just held the glass and stared into its depths. The pregnancy was difficult. My wife grew weaker by the day, her mortal body struggling to carry a child half vampire, half human. We consulted every physician, every healer, every witch and warlock willing to brave our halls. All of them said the same thing. The child would kill her, or she would miscarry. There was no third option. But she survived the birth, Genevieve said softly. She survived the birth, Lark agreed, but not the night. 73 years ago, Eclipse Manor knew daylight. The thought seemed impossible now, but Lark remembered it clearly. The way sunshine had spilled through the eastern windows, warming stone floors that now knew only cold. The way roses had bloomed in gardens that now grew only moonbloom and nightshade. The way his wife had smiled as she placed their newborn son in his arms. "He's perfect," Diana had whispered, her voice weak but radiant. "Look at him, Lark, our perfect boy." And Marlowe had been perfect. Tiny and pink and squalling with life, his silver eyes already so alert, so aware. Half-vampire children were rare. Most died in the womb, their dual nature too volatile to sustain. But Marlowe had fought for life from his first breath. "He'll need a name," Lark had said, unable to look away from his son's face. "Marlowe, for the poet, for beauty and tragedy and—" Diana's words had cut off in a gasp. Blood, too much blood, spreading across white sheets in a crimson tide. Her face went pale, then paler still. The physicians rushed forward, but Lark had lived 6 centuries. He knew death when it announced itself. "No," he'd breathed. "No, Diana, stay with me. Stay. Promise me." Her hand found his, cold already. "Promise you'll protect him, that you'll—" She never finished. The sun had set that evening at precisely 7:43 p.m., painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. Lark had stood at the window, his son in his arms, his wife's body still warm on the bed behind them, and watched the light die. That's when Elspeth Spectre had entered. "My lord," she'd said, her face wet with tears. "I've seen it. The future. Your son's fate." "Not now, Elspeth." "He'll die." Her voice cracked. "Within the week." "There's something in him. Something that needs more life force than his small body can contain. He'll burn himself out like a candle, and there's nothing any physician can do. I'm so sorry. I'm so—" Lark's roar had shaken the manor's foundations. "Fix it!" "My lord, I'm just a seer. I can't—" "You can see the future. You can change it. That's what your gift means, isn't it? That fate isn't fixed." He'd thrust the baby toward her, desperation making him cruel. "My wife is dead. My son is dying. If you have any loyalty, any compassion, any power at all, fix it." Elspeth had taken the baby with trembling hands, looked down into Marlowe's silver eyes, and something in her expression had shifted, hardened into terrible resolve. "There is one way, a binding, a curse that's also a blessing. But my lord, the price, I don't care about the price. You will." She'd kissed the baby's forehead gently. "Oh, you will. But if it's what you command, if it's what must be done to save him." At midnight, beneath a blood-red moon, Elspeth Spectre had worked her magic. Lark didn't understand most of it. The words were old tongue, pre-language. the kind of sounds that made reality shiver. But he understood the results. The infant stopped crying, stopped moving, stopped breathing. But he didn't die. "What have you done?" Lark had whispered. Elspeth's hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the child. Blood dripped from her nose, her ears. The price of magic worked beyond her natural limits. "I've sealed his spirit inside a moment," she'd gasped. "He'll never age, never sicken, never die. He's preserved, perfect, eternal. And the cost? He'll live forever, but he won't live. Not unless—" She'd swayed, her face gray. "Not unless the curse is fulfilled. Not unless—" She'd collapsed before finishing. By morning, Elspeth Spectre was gone. Not dead, though Lark had found her body and buried it in the family cemetery. But forgotten. Her rooms were mysteriously empty. Her belongings dispersed to no one could say whom. Even her own daughter, a girl of 14, couldn't remember her mother's face. The first victim of a curse that would claim 6 more. And Lark had understood, too late, what she'd created. A spell that preserved his son by making him untouchable. A blessing that was also a prison. Life eternal with no one to share it with. The next day the sun hadn't risen. And it never would again. "She died to save him," Genevieve whispered, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Your wife, then Elspeth, they both died for him." "Yes." Lark set down his untouched glass. "And I've spent 73 years ensuring no one else joins them, building walls of protocol and fear around my son to keep him safe. To keep everyone safe from a curse that destroys anyone foolish enough to show him kindness." He turned to face her fully now, and his expression was carved from ancient stone. "So I ask you, Genevieve Spectre, descendant of the woman who created this nightmare, why did you defy every rule, every warning, every protection I've spent 7 decades constructing? Why did you touch him?" The question hung between them like a blade. Genevieve thought of careful answers, political answers, safe answers about curiosity or accident or not understanding the gravity of the situation. But what came out was the truth. "Because he looked cold." Lark blinked. "What?" "He looked cold," she repeated, her voice stronger now. "He was sitting alone in the garden, and he looked so cold, so lonely. And I thought even if the curse took me, at least someone would have shown him warmth. At least for a moment, he wouldn't have been alone." The king stared at her. Something flickered across his face, surprise perhaps, or pain. "That's not a reason," he said finally. "That's suicide wearing compassion's mask." "Maybe, but it's my choice, isn't it? My risk to take?" "No." His voice hardened. "Because when you vanish, when the curse erases you, it won't just be you who suffers. It will be everyone who ever knew you, everyone who ever loved you. They'll wake up with holes in their hearts they can't explain, gaps in their memories that ache without reason. You're not choosing martyrdom. You're choosing to wound everyone you've ever touched." The words hit like physical blows. Genevieve's hands clenched at her sides. "Then why hasn't it happened yet? If the curse is so certain, so powerful, why am I still here? Why do you still remember my name?" "I don't know." And for the first time, Lark Eclipse sounded uncertain, afraid. "Which is precisely why I'm ordering you to never touch him again, never go near him, never—" A sound from the gardens below cut him off. Humming. The same melody from Genevieve's dreams. The lullaby that had no name but felt older than language. Both of them rushed to the window. In the clearing, Prince Marlowe sat on his stone bench, no longer motionless. His small hands moved, plucking at the air as though playing an invisible instrument. And from his lips, barely audible but unmistakable, the song. "That's impossible," Lark breathed. "He hasn't made a sound since the curse took hold," Genevieve finished. "But what if the curse isn't breaking? What if it's completing?" Before Lark could respond, she was moving, out of the chamber, down the spiral stairs, through corridors she'd memorized in 3 weeks of nocturnal wandering. The king's shouts followed her, but she didn't stop. She had to reach him, had to understand. The garden mist parted as she ran into the clearing. Marlowe's humming ceased. His head turned slowly, tracking her approach with those luminous silver eyes. "Please," Genevieve said, though she wasn't sure what she was begging for. "Please, I just want to help." She reached him, knelt before the stone bench, and before she could think better of it, before fear could override instinct, she reached out to adjust his collar. It had twisted awkwardly, the lace pressing against his throat. Her fingers brushed his neck. The world stopped. Not metaphorically, actually stopped. The mist froze mid-drift. The nightbirds fell silent mid-cry. Even her own heartbeat seemed to pause between one beat and the next. Then Marlowe inhaled, sharp and desperate and real, his chest rising as though he'd been drowning and just broke the surface. His eyes went wide, no longer distant and dreaming, but present, aware, alive. And his small hand shot up, gripping her wrist with strength that should have been impossible for a child. "I can feel you," he whispered, his voice rough from 73 years of silence. "I can feel everything. The air, the cold, your heartbeat. I can—" He drew another breath, this one even deeper, and in the chamber above, watching through the window with an expression caught between terror and impossible hope, King Lark Eclipse pressed his forehead against the glass and whispered a prayer to gods he'd stopped believing in centuries ago. Because his son, his beautiful, cursed, eternal son, was breathing. After 73 years of death in life, Prince Marlowe was breathing. And the woman whose touch had achieved the impossible stood trembling in the garden, feeling the prince's pulse beneath her fingers, strong and steady and real. The curse wasn't breaking, it was transforming. And none of them, not the desperate king, not the compassionate maid, not even the awakening prince, understood yet what that transformation would cost. But they would learn. In 3 nights, when the blood moon rose and the curse completed its cycle, they would all learn exactly what Elspeth Spectre had set in motion 73 years ago. And by then, it would be far too late to stop it. The changes started small. Dawn, or what Eclipse Manor called dawn, that gradual lightening of eternal twilight from charcoal to slate, found Prince Marlowe still sitting on his stone bench, still perfectly posed, like a porcelain doll arranged by careful hands. But his eyes moved. Old Thomas, making his morning rounds through the garden, nearly dropped his shears when he saw it. The prince's silver gaze, which had stared at the same fixed point beyond the hedge for 73 years, now tracked the flight of a moth across the clearing, following it, watching it, seeing it. "Sweet mercy," Thomas breathed, backing away slowly. "Sweet mercy and all the saints." He fled to the servants' hall, where his breathless report sent ripples of panic through the morning meal. "His eyes moved," Thomas insisted, gripping his cup with white-knuckled hands. "I've tended these gardens for 40 years, and I'm telling you, he's waking up." "Impossible," Head Chamberlain Morvain said, but her colorless eyes betrayed uncertainty. "The curse doesn't break. It can't. That's the entire point of a curse. Permanence." "Then explain it." Thomas jabbed a finger toward the window, toward the gardens beyond. "Explain how a statue suddenly remembers it has eyes." The servants exchanged glances, some fearful, some curious, all uneasy. Only Genevieve remained silent, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze distant. Because she'd known. Somehow, before Thomas had even entered the hall, she'd known. She could still feel the phantom weight of Marlowe's hand gripping her wrist, the desperate strength in those small fingers. Could still hear his voice, rough and wondering and alive. "I can feel you." Meredith leaned close, her whisper barely audible beneath the rising clamor. "This is because of you, isn't it? What you did last night? I don't know what I did. But you did something, and now—" Meredith glanced toward Morvain, making sure the head chamberlain was occupied with Thomas's continued protests. "Now the whole manor's about to burn down around our ears. You know that, right? When the king finds out—" "The king already knows," Genevieve said quietly. "Because he did." She'd seen him at the window, watching as his son took his first breath in 7 decades, watching as the impossible became merely improbable. And she'd seen the expression on his face, that terrible mixture of hope and horror that meant everything was about to change. "God help us all," Meredith muttered. But even as she said it, a different sound drifted through the open window, faint and distant, but unmistakable. Humming. The servants' hall went silent. The melody was simple, a lullaby, the kind nurses sang to fretful infants. But there was something ancient in it, something that predated language itself. The notes seemed to bypass the ear entirely, resonating directly in the chest, the bones, the blood. Genevieve's breath caught. She knew this song, had heard it in dreams that weren't quite dreams, in memories that couldn't be hers, had felt it pulse through her veins like a second heartbeat since the night she'd first touched the prince. "Are you real?" The question came not from the garden, but from somewhere deeper, closer, as though Marlowe's voice had found a way into her mind. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against stone. "Spectre?" Morvain's sharp voice cut through the silence. "Where do you think you're going?" "The prince is none of your concern, not anymore." The head chamberlain rose, her skeletal frame somehow imposing despite its fragility. "By order of King Lark Eclipse himself, you are relieved of all duties involving the South Wing, the gardens, and most especially Prince Marlowe. You will confine yourself to the North Wing guest chambers and await further instruction." "But this is not a discussion." Morvain's voice dropped to a whisper. "You've done enough damage, girl. More than enough. If you have any sense of self-preservation, you'll stay far away from that boy before the curse remembers you exist." The other servants nodded agreement, their faces pale with fear. All except Thomas, who met Genevieve's eyes and gave the smallest shake of his head. "Not worth it," his expression said. "Let it go." But Genevieve couldn't let it go, because the humming had stopped, and in its absence, she felt something pulling at her, a thread of connection she hadn't noticed being woven, now drawn taut, urging her toward the garden, toward the boy who'd spent 73 years trapped between death and life, toward the answer to questions she hadn't known to ask. "Yes, Chamberlain," she said, keeping her voice level. "I understand." Morvain's eyes narrowed. "See that you do." Genevieve had been 7 years old when her grandmother first mentioned the seer of Moraine. They'd been in the cottage garden, the real one, the one that existed before Eclipse Manor, before curses and princes and blood-soaked dreams. Grandmother Jessamine had been tending her herbs, her weathered hands gentle with the delicate stems. "There's something in you, child," she'd said without preamble. "Something that skips generations but never quite disappears. Do you know what I mean?" Young Genevieve had shaken her head, not understanding. "Sight," Grandmother had continued, her voice soft. "The ability to see beyond what is into what was and what might be. My mother had it, her mother's mother had it, and you—" She'd touched Genevieve's forehead with one dirt-stained finger. "You have it strongest of all." "I don't see anything special," Genevieve had protested. "Not yet, but you will." Grandmother's expression had grown distant, troubled. "There was a woman once, our ancestor, though we don't speak her name anymore. She served a vampire king and made a choice that echoed through generations. Some say she was a hero. Others say she was damned. I say she was both. What choice? The kind that trades one life for another. The kind that curses and blesses in the same breath." Grandmother had returned to her herbs, her hands trembling slightly. "She's why we see, child. Why we dream of futures that haven't happened, and pasts we didn't live. It's her gift and her punishment, passed down through blood. Will I have to make a choice like that?" Grandmother had been quiet for a long moment. "I hope not," she'd said finally. "But if you do, remember that the heart knows truths the mind can't fathom. Trust it, even when it leads you into darkness." Young Genevieve hadn't understood then. She was beginning to understand now. Genevieve made it through the morning pretending to work. She dusted already clean chambers in the north wing, her hands moving mechanically while her mind churned. The pull toward the garden hadn't faded. If anything, it had grown stronger, more insistent. Like a rope tied around her ribs, drawing tighter with each passing hour. By noon, she couldn't bear it anymore. She slipped out during the midday meal when the other servants gathered in the kitchen and the vampire courtiers retreated to their chambers to escape the manor's brief period of brightest twilight. The corridors were empty, shadows deep and watchful. The gardens were closer than they should have been, or perhaps she simply knew the shortcuts now, the hidden paths that servants use to move unseen. Either way, she found herself at the edge of the clearing before she'd consciously decided to go there. Marlowe sat on his bench, exactly where she'd left him hours ago. But everything else had changed. Color had returned to his cheeks. Not much, just the faintest suggestion of pink beneath porcelain skin. His hair, which had been lifeless and dull, now caught the twilight with hints of auburn. And his chest rose and fell in the gentle rhythm of breathing. Slow breathing, shallow breathing, but breathing nonetheless. "You shouldn't be here." Genevieve spun around. King Lark Eclipse stood at the garden's entrance, his tall frame blocking the path back to the manor. He wore black, as always, but now his clothes looked rumpled, as though he'd been pacing, or perhaps hadn't changed since last night. His silver eyes were bloodshot. "Your Majesty, I gave explicit orders." His voice was quiet, which somehow made it more dangerous. "You were to stay away from him. Why can't you follow simple instructions?" "Because he's not an instruction," Genevieve said, surprising herself with her boldness. "He's a child, and he's waking up, and I don't think anyone in this entire manor understands what that means, except possibly me." Lark's expression hardened. "You understand nothing. You're a servant girl who happened to carry the right bloodline at the right time. That doesn't make you special. It makes you dangerous." "To whom?" "To him." Lark moved closer, each step measured. Do you know what happens if the curse completes its transformation? If my son fully awakens? He lives, Genevieve said. He gets to be a child instead of a statue. He dies. The king's voice cracked. The curse was never meant to preserve him permanently. It was meant to hold him in stasis until... He trailed off, his jaw working. Until what? Genevieve pressed. Until the bloodline that created it returned to unmake it. Until a specter touched him and activated the curse's final phase. Lark's hands clenched into fists. Elspeth didn't save my son, she paused him, and you've just hit the resume button on a spell designed to extract a price I cannot pay. What price? A life for a life, death for death, blood for... He stopped, shaking his head. It doesn't matter. What matters is that you leave this manor tonight. I've arranged for a carriage. You'll be paid triple wages for your service and given a letter of reference. By morning, you'll be... No. The single word hung between them like a dropped gauntlet. Lark's eyes widened. I am not asking, Miss Spectre. I am commanding, and I am refusing. Genevieve's heart hammered, but she held her ground. You can dismiss me. You can have me thrown from the manor, but I won't leave him. Not now. Not when he's finally... A small voice cut through the argument. Father? Both of them froze. Marlowe's head had turned. His silver eyes, no longer distant and dreaming but sharp with awareness, focused on the king. His lips moved, forming words that sounded strange in his unused throat. Father, why are you shouting? Lark's face went white, then gray. He swayed slightly, gripping a nearby tree for support. Marlowe, he breathed. You can hear me? Yes. The boy's brow furrowed in confusion. Why wouldn't I? You're standing right there. His gaze shifted to Genevieve. And you're the warm one, the one who touches. The warm one, Genevieve echoed. Everything else is cold, has been cold for... Marlowe's expression grew distant, struggling with concepts his awakening mind couldn't quite grasp. For a long time, but you're warm, like... He touched his own chest, seeming surprised to find it rising and falling. Like this feeling, in here. What is it? Breathing, Genevieve said softly, moving closer despite Lark's sharp inhale of warning. It's called breathing. Breathing, Marlowe repeated, testing the word. I like it. It makes sounds. Everything makes sounds now. The air, the leaves, your heart. He tilted his head, listening. Your heart is very loud. Is it supposed to be that loud? Despite everything, despite the fear and confusion and the king's barely restrained panic, Genevieve smiled. It's loud because I'm nervous. Why? Because I don't know if I'm helping you or hurting you. Marlowe considered this with the gravity of someone far older than his physical age. When he spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. Are you real? The question struck something deep in Genevieve's chest, an ache that felt like recognition. I am, she said. Are you? I don't know. His small hands gripped the edge of the stone bench. I remember not being anything except waiting in the dark for... His eyes found hers again, and in them she saw something that made her breath catch. For you. I was waiting for you. That's enough, Lark said sharply, finally finding his voice. Marlowe, you need to rest. This awakening is too much, too fast. You need to... I don't want to rest. For the first time, Petulance crept into the boy's tone, the normal frustration of a child being told what to do. "I've been resting forever. I want to stay awake. I want to talk to her. The warm one, Genevieve." He said her name like a discovery, like something precious. Lark's expression crumbled. "Son, please." "It's all right," Genevieve said quietly. "I'll stay. Just for a while. Just until—" "No." The king's voice was steel wrapped in desperation. "You won't. You'll leave tonight, as planned, and my son will return to his sleep. And everything will go back to—" "To what?" Genevieve turned to face him fully. "To him sitting alone in a garden for another 70 years? To you watching from windows and dying slowly from guilt? To everyone in this manner trapped in the same eternal moment because you're too afraid to let it end? You don't understand what you're asking. Then explain it to me. Not in threats or half-truths. Really explain it." She gestured to Marlowe, who watched them both with wide, uncertain eyes. "Because that child deserves better than fear. He deserves someone willing to try." Lark opened his mouth, closed it. For a long moment he simply stared at her. This servant girl who'd upended 73 years of careful stasis in a matter of days. Then, slowly, his shoulders sagged. "Very well," he said, sounding ancient and defeated. "Tonight, when the moon rises, meet me in the library and I'll tell you everything. The real story of what Elspeth Spectre created, and why your presence here means we're all running out of time." He looked past her to his son, and the naked love in his expression was almost painful to witness. "Marlowe," he said softly, "I'll return soon. Until then, be good for Miss Spectre." "I'm always good," Marlowe said, with the absolute certainty of the very young. Lark's smile was broken. "I know you are." He turned and walked away, his footsteps heavy on the garden path, leaving Genevieve alone with the awakening prince, whose silver eyes reflected moonlight that shouldn't exist, and whose breathing was the most precious sound she'd ever heard. "Genevieve?" Marlowe said after a moment. "Yes?" "When you touched me, when I could finally feel things, I heard a song." His small hand reached out, not quite touching her but hovering inches away, as though he'd learned already that touch had consequences. "Do you know it? The one about the moon and the roses and the blood?" Genevieve's throat tightened, because she did know it, had known it all her life, hummed by a grandmother who'd called it the seer's lullaby, and warned her never to sing it in the presence of the undead. "Yes," she whispered, "I know it. Will you sing it for me?" I don't think that's a good idea. Please." His face held such innocent hope. "I've been so quiet for so long. I want to hear something beautiful, something warm." And despite every instinct screaming at her to refuse, despite knowing that songs and curses and bloodlines were all tangled together in ways she didn't understand, Genevieve found herself kneeling beside the stone bench, found herself taking the boy's small hand in hers, and this time he didn't gasp or startle, just curled his fingers around hers like it was the most natural thing in the world. Found herself singing in a voice barely above a whisper, "Sleep now, child of moon and thorn, rest until the world's reborn, blood for blood and death for death, wake with your beloved's breath." Marlowe's eyes drifted closed, his breathing deepening into something like natural sleep. And from the manor's highest tower, King Lark Eclipse heard his son's nursemaid sing the same lullaby his wife had hummed the night she died, and knew with terrible certainty that the curse was not breaking. It was fulfilling itself. And by the time the blood moon rose in 3 nights, they would all understand exactly what that meant. The library existed in a part of Eclipse Manor that shouldn't exist. Genevieve had walked past the corridor a dozen times, a dead end terminating in a blank stone wall hung with a faded tapestry depicting some long-forgotten hunt. But tonight, with moonlight slanting through the high windows at just the right angle, she'd noticed something. The tapestry moved. Not with wind. There was never wind in Eclipse Manor. With breath. She'd pulled the heavy fabric aside to find a narrow door, its wood so old it had turned nearly black. No lock, no handle, just a subtle indentation where centuries of hands had pushed. It opened at her touch. The library beyond was small, barely larger than her servants' quarters, and thick with dust that swirled in her candlelight like smoke. 3 walls were lined floor to ceiling with books so ancient their spines had lost all lettering. The 4th wall held a single window, narrow as an arrow slit, through which pale moonlight leaked. And in the center of the room sat a reading desk with a single volume laid open, as though someone had just stepped away and would return any moment. Genevieve approached slowly, her pulse loud in the silence. The book was bound in cracked leather that might once have been red, but had faded to the brown of dried blood. No title marked its cover, but when she leaned close, she could make out words on the open page, written in elegant script that varied between steady and trembling. 13th of Frost Moon, Year of the Crimson Eclipse. They call me seer, as though the title explains anything, as though seeing the future is a gift rather than a burden. But tonight, I have seen something that cannot be unseen, cannot be unforeseen, cannot be— The handwriting dissolved into a smear, as though the writer's hand had shaken too badly to continue. I must be calm. I must record this clearly, for whoever finds these words after I am gone, and I will be gone. Of this, I am certain. The visions show me my own death as clearly as they show me the prince's salvation. His Majesty King Alaric Eclipse came to me 3 days ago. His wife, the mortal queen, carries a child that is killing her from within. The physicians say she cannot survive the birth. The king commanded me to see if there was another way. I looked. God forgive me. I looked into futures I should have left veiled, and I found one, singular and terrible, where both mother and child survive. But the price— Genevieve's hands trembled as she turned the page. The price is blood. Always blood with vampires, but not the blood they drink, the blood they are. A sacrifice of lineage, a binding of generations. I would have to tie my own bloodline to the curse, ensuring that only my descendants could undo what I create. I told the king this was madness, that such magic would echo through centuries, damning both our families to an intertwined fate. He did not care. "Fix it," he commanded. "Save them both, whatever the cost." So I did. The next several pages were filled with diagrams and symbols that made Genevieve's eyes water to look at, complex geometries that seemed to shift and writhe in the candlelight, magical formulae in languages she didn't recognize, and scattered throughout, notes in that same elegant, trembling hand. The binding requires a vessel, someone to hold the child's excess life force until he grows strong enough to contain it himself. The vessel must be willing, must be of my blood, must sacrifice everything. I have a daughter, barely 14. She has the sight, though it manifests weakly. Perhaps weak enough that she might be spared the worst of this. Perhaps. But I cannot ask this of her, cannot condemn my own child to— More smearing. More places where the ink had run, as though tears had fallen on fresh writing. The next entry was dated 3 weeks later. It is done. Queen Elena lives. The prince lives. My daughter no longer remembers my name. The curse took her memories of me as payment. Took them from everyone who ever knew me. By morning, I will be nothing but a ghost in the archives, if that. But the worst part is knowing this isn't the end. The spell I wove doesn't break. It transforms. In 73 years, when the prince reaches the age he should have been born, the curse will seek its final payment. A life for a life. Blood for blood. One of my descendants will return, will touch the prince, will complete what I started, and they will have a choice. Become the vessel themselves and let the prince live free, or walk away and let him sleep forever. Preserved, but never living. I have doomed them, just as surely as King Alaric doomed me. God forgive us both. The handwriting on the final page was barely legible, shaking so badly the words overlapped. He knows I planned to tell Elena the truth, that her son's salvation cost my daughter her mother, that the price of their happiness was— He's coming. I can hear him on the stairs. King Alaric, with his beautiful face and ancient rage. He thinks I'll expose him, thinks I'll tell the court what he commanded me to do. He's right. To whoever finds this, my name is Elspeth Spectre. I was the seer of Moraine, and I loved this kingdom more than my own life. But love, I have learned too late, is not enough to— The sentence ended in a violent slash of ink across the page. Then nothing but blank pages, their emptiness louder than any words. Genevieve stood frozen, the candlelight wavering in her shaking hand. King Alaric. Not King Lark, a different king, an ancestor. But the name was so similar, the rage so familiar. You shouldn't be in here. She spun around so fast she nearly dropped the candle. Marlowe stood in the doorway, his small frame silhouetted against the corridor's dim light. He was out of the garden, out of the clearing where he'd spent 73 years, walking on his own, moving like a real child instead of a beautiful statue. "Marlowe," she breathed. "How did you—" "I followed you." He stepped into the library, his movements still uncertain, like a newborn learning its legs. "I heard you leave your room, heard your footsteps, so I followed them." He looked around the library with wide eyes. "This place smells old." "It is old, very old." Genevieve set the candle down carefully, her mind still reeling from what she'd read. "You shouldn't be walking around on your own. If your father finds out—" "Father is in the wine cellar." Marlowe said it matter-of-factly. "He goes there when he's angry, stays there until he's— different." "Different how?" The boy shrugged, then seemed surprised by the gesture, as though he'd just discovered he could move his shoulders. "Red-eyed, quiet. Scary quiet, not normal quiet. The chalice of crimson blood," Genevieve thought, remembering the king's words from that first night. "For the first time in 100 years. "Marlowe," she said carefully, "do you remember anything from before? From when you were— sleeping?" "Some things, mostly feelings." He moved closer, his silver eyes fixed on the open diary. "Waiting, being cold, wanting someone to find me." His small hand reached out, hovering over the page. "This writing feels like you, like it's connected to your warm. It was written by my ancestor, the woman who created the curse that kept you sleeping." Oh, he processed this with a child's simple logic. So, she's why I was cold? Yes, but also why you're alive. That's confusing. It is, Genevieve admitted. Marlowe was quiet for a moment, his head tilted in thought. Then he reached into his shirt and pulled out something on a thin chain. A locket, small and tarnished with age. I found this when I woke up, he said. It was in my pocket. I don't remember putting it there, but it feels important. Like it's been waiting, too. He opened the locket carefully. Inside was a lock of dark hair, human hair, not the auburn shade of Marlowe's own, and an engraving on the inner lid, a symbol, a circle containing a crescent moon wrapped in thorny vines, with a single drop of blood at the center. Genevieve's breath caught. With trembling hands, she reached for her own neck, pulling out the pendant she'd worn since childhood, the one her grandmother had given her before she died, saying only, "This is yours by right of blood. Keep it close, and it will guide you when the time comes." She opened it. The same symbol stared back at her, identical in every detail. "We match," Marlowe said, his voice pleased. "Does that mean we're connected? Like family?" "I think—" Genevieve's throat was tight. "I think it means our families have been tied together for a very long time, longer than either of us has been alive. Is that good or bad?" Before she could answer, a sound erupted from somewhere deep in the manor, a crash like stone breaking, followed by a roar that barely sounded human. Marlowe's eyes went wide. "Father!" Genevieve grabbed the diary, tucking it into her apron. "We need to go. Now." "But—" "Now." She took his hand, and this time there was no gasp, no magical shock, just the warm press of a child's palm against hers, trusting and real. They ran. Through the hidden library's door, down corridors that suddenly seemed darker than before, following the sounds of destruction that echoed through the manor like thunder. Servants scattered before them, their faces pale with terror. "What's happening?" Meredith grabbed Genevieve's arm as they passed. "Is it the king? Is he—" Another crash, closer now. "Get to your rooms," Genevieve said. "Lock your doors. Don't come out until morning." "But—" "Go." Meredith fled. Genevieve and Marlowe reached the grand library, the public one, the beautiful one with soaring ceilings and thousands of volumes arranged in careful order, to find it in ruins. Bookshelves were overturned. Ancient tomes lay scattered across marble floors, their pages torn and trampled. The great chandelier had fallen, its crystal prisms scattered like broken stars. And in the center of the destruction stood King Lark Eclipse, but not the controlled, composed King Genevieve had met days ago. This was something older, rawer. His eyes burned crimson instead of silver, his hands were stained dark, whether with wine or blood, she couldn't tell. His lips were pulled back from his fangs in an expression caught between rage and anguish. "You read it," he said, his voice a ragged growl. "You found the hidden library. You read her diary." It wasn't a question. "Yes," Genevieve said, stepping in front of Marlowe instinctively. "Then you know." Lark laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "You know what my ancestor did, what he commanded, what price he paid for his son's life." "Murder," Genevieve said quietly. "He murdered Elspeth after she saved the queen and the prince, killed her to keep the truth hidden, and made himself a monster in the process, started the eclipse line down a path we've never escaped." Lark's crimson eyes found his son, and something in his expression crumbled. "I swore I'd be different, swore I'd never let my son's life cost another's. That's why I sealed him away, to prevent the curse from completing, from demanding its final price. "A life for a life," Genevieve said, remembering the diary's words. "Blood for blood." Yes. Lark took a step forward, and Marlowe pressed closer to Genevieve's back. "And you're the blood it's calling for. You, descendant of the seer who bound our families together. You're meant to be the vessel, to take the curse into yourself so my son can live free." "Father?" Marlowe's voice was small. "What does that mean?" Lark's face twisted. "It means she'll die, just like Elspeth died, just like my mother died, just like everyone who's ever tried to save an Eclipse prince." The words hung in the air like smoke. Genevieve's heart hammered, but she forced herself to stand straight, to meet those burning crimson eyes without flinching. "Is that what you're afraid of?" she asked softly. "That I'll die?" "Yes." "No." She shook her head. "That's not what terrifies you. What terrifies you is that I might choose to die, that I might look at your son and decide he's worth the price, just like your ancestor decided the queen was worth it, just like Elspeth decided the prince was worth it." Lark flinched as though she'd struck him. "What you fear," Genevieve continued, her voice gaining strength, "isn't him, isn't the curse, isn't even death. What you fear is yourself, that if you let this happen, if you let me make that choice, you'll be exactly like King Alaric, a monster who sacrifices others to save what he loves." "I'm already a monster," Lark whispered. "Then prove you're not." Genevieve pulled the diary from her apron, holding it out. "Tell me the whole truth, not fragments, not warnings, everything. Tell me what happens in 3 nights when the blood moon rises, and let me decide for myself what price I'm willing to pay." For a long moment, Lark simply stared at her. This servant girl who'd walked into his cursed manor and shattered centuries of carefully maintained control. Then, slowly, the crimson faded from his eyes, the rage drained from his posture. He looked suddenly exhausted, ancient in a way that had nothing to do with his immortal age. "Very well," he said hoarsely, "but not here, and not with him." He looked at Marlowe. "Son, go to your chamber. Miss Spectre and I need to—" "No." Marlowe's hand tightened on Genevieve's. "I'm not sleeping anymore. I'm not being sent away. This is about me, so I should know." "Marlowe." "No." The child's voice was surprisingly firm. "I've been quiet for 73 years. I've been good. I've waited. But I'm done waiting, Father. I want to know why everyone's afraid of me living." Lark's expression shattered. He sank to his knees among the scattered books, his head bowing. For a moment, he looked less like an ancient vampire king and more like what he truly was, a father who'd spent 7 decades trying to protect his son from a fate he couldn't change. "You're right," he said finally. "You deserve to know, you both do." He looked up, meeting Genevieve's eyes. 3 nights from now, when the blood moon rises, the curse will reach its completion. Marlowe will have a choice: remain as he is, alive but not living, breathing but not growing, or fully awaken. But full awakening requires a vessel, someone to hold the excess life force that nearly killed him as an infant, someone to— His voice cracked. Someone to die in his place, so he can truly live. "And that someone has to be a spectre," Genevieve said. "Yes, because Elspeth bound her bloodline to the curse, made it so only her descendants could complete or break the spell. Can it be broken? Without the sacrifice?" Lark was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know," he admitted. "I've spent 73 years searching for another way. But every text, every oracle, every forbidden magic I've studied says the same thing. Blood magic demands blood payment. The only way to truly free him is for me to die." The words fell between them like stones. Marlowe made a small sound of distress. "No, I don't want that. I don't want anyone to die for me." "I know, sweetheart." Genevieve knelt beside him, still holding his hand. "But sometimes the choices we're given aren't fair." "Then we'll find a different choice," the boy said fiercely. "We'll make one, together." Despite everything, Genevieve smiled. "Together," she agreed. She looked at Lark, still kneeling among the ruins of his library, and saw her own determination reflected in his weary eyes. "3 nights," she said. "We have 3 nights to find another way. And if we can't," she took a deep breath, "if we can't, then at least we'll face it knowing we tried. All of us. Together." Lark stood slowly, his movements heavy with the weight of centuries. "Together," he echoed, and for the first time since she'd arrived at Eclipse Manor, Genevieve heard something like hope in the Vampire King's voice. It was fragile, it was desperate, it was probably doomed, but it was there. And sometimes, hope was enough to start with. The first sign that something was wrong, or perhaps finally right, came at breakfast. Genevieve sat in the servants' hall, spooning porridge that tasted like yesterday's porridge, which had tasted like the day before's porridge, when she noticed Meredith's face. Not anything unusual about the face itself, just that it was familiar. Too familiar. The serving girl who'd brought the bread had Meredith's nose. The stable hand passing by the window had Meredith's eyes. And old Thomas, sitting 3 seats down, had Meredith's exact expression of worried concentration as he ate. Genevieve blinked, and the similarities vanished. "You all right?" Meredith herself asked, the real Meredith sitting across the table. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Maybe I have," Genevieve murmured. Because now that she'd noticed it, she couldn't stop noticing. The chambermaid in the corner had the head gardener's walk. The footman had the cook's hands. Features bleeding between people like watercolors in rain. "It's getting worse," Thomas said quietly, as though reading her thoughts. "The sameness. I've worked here 40 years and I'm starting to forget which 40. They all run together now. Same days, same faces, same—" He stopped, his weathered face troubled. "Sometimes I can't remember my own daughter's name. I know I have one, had one, but when I try to picture her—" He trailed off, staring into his porridge. Genevieve's chest tightened. The curse. Must be. Spreading. Getting hungry. Thomas looked up, his eyes clearer than they'd been in days. That boy waking up, it's not just changing him, it's changing everything. Like the whole manor's been holding its breath for 73 years, and now it's starting to exhale. Is that bad? Don't know yet, but it's definitely something. That evening, as twilight deepened to the manor's version of night, Genevieve found Marlowe waiting outside her door. He stood perfectly still, old habit, but his eyes tracked her approach, bright with an alertness that grew stronger every day. Color had spread from his cheeks to his whole face now, and his hair had darkened to a rich auburn that caught the lamplight. "I want to see the forest," he said without preamble. "The real forest, not just the garden. I'm not sure that's safe." "Nothing's safe." He said it with a child's blunt logic. "Everything's cursed anyway. Might as well see things before they disappear." Genevieve couldn't argue with that. They slipped out through the servants' entrance, avoiding the main halls where the king held court with his undead nobility. The night air was cold, truly cold, not just the perpetual chill of the manor. Genevieve pulled her shawl tighter. Marlowe wore no coat, but he didn't seem to notice the temperature. His attention was fixed ahead, where the manicured gardens gave way to wild forest. "Have you ever been in there?" Genevieve asked. "No. I couldn't before. Couldn't move far enough." He took a tentative step past the garden's border, onto the leaf-strewn forest floor. "It's different than I imagined." "How so?" "It's the same." Genevieve frowned. "I don't understand." Marlowe pointed. "That tree there, the one with the twisted trunk, and that one beside it with the broken branch, and that one with the hollow. They're the same as the trees behind us." She turned to look where they'd come from. He was right. The trees formed a pattern: twisted trunk, broken branch, hollow, that repeated. Not similar, exactly the same. Like wallpaper, the design tiling endlessly in all directions. "That's not possible," Genevieve breathed. "Lots of impossible things are possible now." Marlowe moved deeper into the forest, his small hand finding hers. "Come on, let's see how far it goes." They walked. The forest should have changed, should have revealed clearings or streams or variations in terrain. But instead, the same pattern repeated. The same twisted trunk, the same broken branch, the same hollow tree, over and over, stretching into darkness. After what felt like an hour of walking, Genevieve noticed something else. Their footprints in the soft earth. They formed a trail behind them, showing where they'd been. Except, the trail went in a circle. They'd somehow looped back to where they'd started without ever turning around. "The curse doesn't just affect people," Genevieve said slowly, understanding dawning. "It affects space itself, time, reality. Everything's been frozen, locked in place." "Like me," Marlowe said. "Like you." He looked up at the sky and stopped walking so abruptly that Genevieve nearly stumbled. "What is it?" Marlowe didn't answer, just stared upward, his silver eyes wide. Genevieve followed his gaze. The sky was wrong. She'd gotten used to Eclipse Manor's perpetual twilight, the way the sun never quite rose or set. But now, watching carefully, she saw something she'd missed before. The stars didn't move. They hung in perfect stillness, like jewels pinned to velvet. As she watched, one of them blinked out, just vanished, as though someone had snuffed a candle. Then it reappeared, blinked out again, reappeared. The pattern spread, stars flickering in and out of existence, faster and faster, until the whole sky strobed with unstable light. "It's breaking," Marlowe whispered. "The spell. It's breaking." A sound split the air, like ice cracking on a frozen lake. The strobing stopped, the stars stabilized. But now, along the eastern horizon, the faintest hint of color appeared. Not the gray of eternal twilight, but something warmer, softer. Pink. Marlowe made a sound between a gasp and a sob. Is that sunrise?" "I think so. I've never seen one." His voice was filled with wonder. 73 years and I've never—" The pink faded, disappeared as though it had never been. Twilight reasserted itself with almost audible finality. Marlowe's shoulders sagged. "It was beautiful," he said quietly. "Even just that little bit. It was so beautiful." Genevieve squeezed his hand. "You'll see a full one, I promise." "You can't promise that." "I can try." They stood together in the frozen forest, surrounded by identical trees under flickering stars, and Genevieve felt the weight of her ancestor's curse pressing down like physical force. Elspeth had tried to save a child and ended up trapping an entire kingdom in amber, had damned her own bloodline to carry the burden of that choice. And now, Genevieve stood where Elspeth had stood, faced with the same impossible decision: save the child and doom herself, or walk away and let the curse continue forever. "What would you choose?" she asked silently, to the woman whose diary she carried in her apron pocket. "If you could do it again, knowing everything it would cost, would you still make the same choice?" No answer came, but Genevieve thought she knew it anyway. Love always made the same choice, even when the price was everything. "Look," Marlowe said, pointing. Through the trees, Genevieve saw movement, figures walking through the forest, translucent, flickering in and out of visibility like the stars. She recognized some of them from portraits in the manor, ancient eclipse nobility who died centuries ago, servants whose names she'd found in dusty ledgers, and others, strangers with familiar faces. Her face. Genevieve's breath caught. A woman walked through the trees, her form ghostly and incomplete. She wore clothes from decades past and carried something in her arms, a bundle wrapped in white cloth. She moved with purpose, heading somewhere specific, her lips moving in silent words. Another figure appeared, then another, all women, all with variations of Genevieve's features. The same dark hair, the same sharp cheekbones, the same determined set to their jaw. Specters, her ancestors, the bloodline Elspeth had bound to the curse. "They're looking for something," Marlowe said, "or someone." The ghostly women converged on a single point deep in the forest, a place where the repeating pattern of trees broke, revealing a clearing Genevieve hadn't noticed before. In the center of the clearing sat a moss-covered bench, the same bench from her dreams. "We should go there," Marlowe said. "I don't think—" But he was already moving, pulling her forward with surprising strength. The ghost women parted to let them pass, their translucent faces turning to watch. Genevieve met the eyes of one, a woman who might have been her great-grandmother or great-great-grandmother, and saw recognition. Approval. "You understand now," the ghost seemed to say. "You see what we saw." "What did you see?" Genevieve wanted to ask. "What choice did you make?" But the ghost faded before she could speak. They reached the bench. It was old, older than the manor, perhaps. The stone was worn smooth by countless hands, countless bodies resting there. Moss grew thick in the carved letters along the back, but Genevieve could make out enough to read, "For those who wait, for those who remember, for those who choose." "Sit with me," Marlowe said, climbing onto the bench. "Please." Genevieve sat. The moment she did, the world shifted. The ghostly women vanished. The repeating trees faded. The frozen stars overhead brightened, then dimmed, then brightened again, pulsing like a heartbeat. And at their feet, where no water had been before, a pool appeared. Not large, barely 3 feet across, but perfectly still, perfectly clear. A mirror of liquid silver that reflected the sky above, except it didn't reflect them. Genevieve looked down and saw the bench in the reflection, saw the moss and the carved letters and the edge of the clearing. But where she and Marlowe sat, the reflection showed only empty space. "We're not there," Marlowe whispered. "In the mirror, we don't exist." "The curse," Genevieve said. "It's showing us what we are to the spell, to reality. You're frozen outside time. I'm marked for erasure. Neither of us is properly real right now." "I don't like it." Neither do I. She reached out, meaning to touch the water, to see if it would respond to her even if it couldn't reflect her. But Marlowe caught her hand. Wait, he said. Try something else first. Like what? He turned to face her fully on the bench. Up close, she could see the faint luminescence of his silver eyes, brighter than they'd been yesterday, changing hour by hour as the curse unwound. Touch my face, he said, like you did before, in the garden, please. Marlowe, I don't know if that's safe. Nothing's safe. You said so yourself. His small hand found hers, guiding it toward his cheek. I want to see what happens. I want to know if I can be real. Genevieve hesitated. Then, slowly, she cupped his face in her palm. His skin was warm. That was the first miracle. Not the porcelain coolness of the undead, not the statue stillness of the cursed, just the ordinary warmth of a living child. The second miracle was his sigh, relief and recognition, and something deeper. As though he'd been waiting his entire life for this exact moment, this exact touch. The third miracle was the reflection. Genevieve looked down at the pool and saw them. Not clearly, their images wavered and flickered like candle flames, but they were there. Two figures on a moss-covered bench, one small and one larger, connected by touch, existing, real, present. We're in the mirror, Marlowe breathed. The forest exhaled. That was the only way Genevieve could describe it. The trees, all of them, even the endlessly repeating pattern, seemed to breathe out in unison. The air shimmered, the ground beneath the bench trembled, and for just a moment she saw the forest as it truly was, not frozen, not repeating, but alive and growing and changing, with clearings that led to streams, paths that wound to distant mountains, trees that were each unique and perfect in their individuality. The real world. The one that existed before the curse locked it away. Then the moment passed, and the illusion reasserted itself. Repeating trees, still air, frozen stars. But the pool at their feet remained, and in it their reflections stayed visible, flickering but undeniable proof that they existed, that they mattered, that reality itself was starting to remember them. From behind a tree at the edge of the clearing, King Lark Eclipse watched. He'd followed them, unable to stay away, driven by fear and hope, and the terrible need to witness whatever was happening to his son. He'd seen the ghostly women, seen the pool appear, seen his son's reflection materialize where before there had been only emptiness. And now, watching Genevieve touch Marlowe's face with such tenderness, watching his son respond with such joy, Lark felt something he hadn't experienced in 73 years. The forest breathing around him. Not metaphorically, actually breathing. The trees inhaling and exhaling, the earth rising and falling like lungs, the very air pulsing with life that had been dormant for decades. The curse was breaking, or transforming, or completing itself. He didn't know which, didn't know if there was even a difference anymore. But he knew with terrible certainty that in 2 nights, when the blood moon rose and the final phase of the spell began, everything would change. The frozen moment that had preserved his son would shatter. Time would resume. Reality would remember. And someone would pay the price. Elspeth had written into the spell's foundation, "A life for a life, blood for blood." Lark's hands clenched at his sides. He'd spent 73 years trying to prevent this, building walls of protocol and fear, isolating his son to keep him safe, becoming the monster his ancestor had been, all in the name of protection. But watching Genevieve and Marlowe reflected in that impossible pool, seeing the joy on his son's face as he experienced something as simple as human touch, Lark wondered if he'd been protecting Marlowe at all, or if he'd just been protecting himself from having to make the choice King Alaric had made. The choice every Eclipse King made, eventually. Whose life mattered more, the one you love, or the one who might save them? In the clearing, Genevieve removed her hand from Marlowe's face. Their reflections flickered and faded, but didn't disappear entirely. They remained visible, ghostly but present. "It's working," Marlowe said, his voice filled with wonder. "Whatever you're doing, it's making me real." "Not just you," Genevieve said softly, looking at her own wavering reflection. "Both of us. We're becoming real together. Is that how the curse breaks? We both have to be real at the same time? I don't know. Maybe. Or maybe—" She trailed off, her expression distant. "Maybe that's how it completes. Maybe Elspeth designed it so we'd have to choose together. You and me. Eclipse and Spectre. Not sacrifice, but partnership. Shared fate. I like that better than dying. So do I." They sat together on the moss-covered bench, reflected in a pool that shouldn't exist, surrounded by a forest that was starting to remember how to be alive. And watching from the shadows, King Lark Eclipse felt the weight of 73 years begin to lift. Or perhaps just shift, transferring from his shoulders to his heart, where it settled like stones and whispered, "2 nights. 2 nights to find another way, or accept that the only way forward is through sacrifice. Again. Always. Forever." The forest breathed around him, and Lark pressed his forehead against the rough bark of the tree and prayed to gods he'd stopped believing in that this time, finally, love might be enough. That protection might not require sacrifice. That saving his son might not cost another mother's daughter her life. But the forest's breathing sounded like laughter, and the curse, waking from its long sleep, whispered, "Soon, soon, soon." It started with the vines. Genevieve and Marlowe were still sitting on the moss-covered bench, their reflections flickering in the impossible pool, when the first tendril crept from the undergrowth. Neither of them noticed, not at first. They were too focused on the water, on the way their images grew clearer with each passing moment. "Look," Marlowe said, pointing. "My fingers. They have lines now, in the reflection, like real hands." "They are real hands," Genevieve said softly. "But they're more real than before. Like the mirror is teaching them how to—" The vine wrapped around his ankle. Marlowe gasped, looking down. The tendril was thick as a rope, covered in thorns that wept something dark and viscous. As they watched, more vines emerged, from the ground, from the trees, from the air itself, as though reality were unraveling into vegetative chaos. "Genevieve?" Marlowe's voice was small, frightened. She tried to stand, but vines caught her wrists, her waist, pulling her back down onto the bench. They weren't gentle. Thorns bit through fabric, drawing blood that sizzled where it touched the supernatural growth. "Let him go!" Genevieve struggled against the binding. "Whatever this is, take me, but let him—" The whispers began. Faint at first, like wind through leaves. But the words were wrong, backwards, overlapping, spoken in languages that predated language itself. They came from everywhere and nowhere, carried on air that tasted of grave dirt and roses. Blood calls to blood. Death calls to death. What is given cannot be taken back. "No," Genevieve breathed, recognizing the words from her dreams, from Elspeth's diary, from the very foundation of the curse. "No, it's too soon. The blood moon isn't for 2 more nights." "Time means nothing to the sleeping spell," the voices hissed. "It wakes when it wakes. It feeds when it hungers. It completes when the pieces align. And now, at last, all the pieces are here." The vines tightened. Marlowe cried out, not in pain, but in confusion and fear. His silver eyes found Genevieve's, wide and pleading. "I don't understand," he said. "What's happening? What are they—" His words cut off in a choking gasp. Something moved inside him. Genevieve saw it through his shirt, a shadow pressing against his skin from within, as though something large and terrible were trying to claw its way out of his chest. The boy's back arched. His small hands clutched at his heart. "Marlowe!" Genevieve tore at the vines, ignoring the thorns that shredded her palms. "Hold on! Just hold on!" The shadow pushed harder, and the whispers became screams. They erupted from every direction. The voices of the dead, the forgotten, the erased. Genevieve heard Elspeth's voice among them, and Queen Diana's, and 100 others she didn't recognize. All of them crying out in anguish and rage and desperate warning. "Run. Save yourself. It's too late for him. It was always too late." "No!" Genevieve's own scream joined theirs. "I won't leave him! I won't!" The shadow burst from Marlowe's chest. Not blood, not flesh, just darkness given form, a shape that was almost human, almost recognizable, but wrong in ways that made her eyes water to perceive it. It wore a crown of fire that burned with no heat. Its face was everyone's face and no one's face, constantly shifting between expressions of rage and sorrow. The ancestral spirit, the thing that had been sealed inside Marlowe for 73 years, the excess life force that should have killed him as an infant. It was free, and it was hungry. The spirit's eyes, if they were eyes, fixed on Genevieve. When it spoke, its voice was every voice from the screaming chorus, overlaid and harmonized into something that resonated in her bones. "Spectre, you have come at last. The vessel, the key, the price." Marlowe lay crumpled on the ground, the vines releasing him now that he was empty. His chest still rose and fell. He was breathing, alive, but his eyes had gone distant again, unfocused, like he'd retreated back into the dream state that had held him for decades. "What did you do to him?" Genevieve demanded, still struggling against her own bindings. "Nothing he will remember. The boy is free now, the burden removed. He will wake and grow and live as mortals do." The spirit drifted closer, its fire crown blazing brighter. "If you complete the exchange." Exchange? Life for life, blood for blood. These are the terms Elspeth Spectre agreed to when she wove this spell. A vessel to hold what the child could not contain. She thought herself that vessel. She was wrong. The spirit's hand, translucent and terrible, reached toward Genevieve's chest. "You are the vessel. You have always been the vessel. Every spectre daughter born since that night has been preparation for this moment. Bloodline refined, magic concentrated, all to create one strong enough to hold what I am." Understanding crashed over Genevieve like cold water. Elspeth hadn't just tied her bloodline to the curse, she'd weaponized it, turned her descendants into a breeding program designed to produce someone capable of containing this thing. Every spectre woman for 3 generations had been a step toward creating the perfect vessel. Creating her. "And if I refuse?" Genevieve asked, though she already knew the answer. Then I return to the boy. The spell resets. He sleeps another 73 years, while reality waits for the next specter daughter to be born. And the cycle continues, forever, or until there are no more specters to summon. The spirit's hand pressed against her chest. Not physically, it passed through cloth and flesh like smoke. But she felt it anyway, cold and invasive, searching for the space where it would fit, where it would consume her from within. "No," she whispered. Then louder, "No! You have no choice. There's always a choice." But even as she said it, she knew it was a lie. Elspeth had made sure of that, had written inevitability into the spell's DNA. Genevieve could let the spirit take her and free Marlowe, or she could refuse and doom him to eternal sleep. Those were the only options. Unless… the incantation. The thought came not from her own mind, but from somewhere deeper, older, a memory that wasn't hers, but felt more real than any of her own thoughts. Words rising through her blood like bubbles from the deep. Words Elspeth had written in the margins of her diary, the ink so faded, Genevieve had barely been able to read them. She'd thought they were just notes, fragments, meaningless, but now they arranged themselves in her mind with perfect clarity. When blood calls to blood and the vessel stands ready, speak the words that were and will be. Let the divided become whole. Let the price be paid in full, not death for life, but life with life. Two flames joined, one light. "Stop!" The command cut through the chaos like a blade. King Lark Eclipse burst into the clearing, his face twisted with desperation and rage. He moved with a vampire's impossible speed, covering the distance between the forest's edge and the bench in less than a heartbeat. Too late, too slow, too human in his fear. He reached for Genevieve, trying to pull her away from the spirit's touch, but the vines caught him too. They wrapped around his arms, his legs, his throat, holding him back, forcing him to watch. "Genevieve!" His voice was raw. "Don't do this, please! There has to be another way! There has to—" "There isn't," she said, and was surprised by how calm she sounded, how certain. "This is what Elspeth designed, what my bloodline was made for. I can feel it in my bones, the purpose I was born to serve." "No, I won't let you. I won't." Lark struggled against the vines, his strength far beyond mortal, but still insufficient against magic this old, this powerful. "Take me instead. I'm the one who commanded it. I'm the one who—" "You cannot be the vessel," the spirit said, almost gently. "You are Eclipse. This requires specter. Blood calls to blood, always." "Then kill me after," Lark said desperately. "Let her live, and take my life in trade. A king for a servant. That's fair, that's—" "That's not how it works," Genevieve finished. She met his eyes, those ancient silver eyes that had watched too many people die, too many loves fail. "And you know it. You've always known it." Tears cut lines down Lark's face. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. If I'd never sealed him, if I'd just let him die as an infant instead of—" "Then he would have died," Genevieve said simply, "and this moment would never have happened. And maybe that would have been better. But maybe it wouldn't. We'll never know now." The spirit's hand sank deeper into her chest. Genevieve gasped. Cold flooded through her, not the cold of winter, but the cold of absence, the cold of things that should be there but aren't, the cold of the void between stars. "I'm sorry," she whispered, to Marlowe, still crumpled and unaware on the ground. To Lark, struggling uselessly against the vines. To her grandmother, who'd tried to warn her. To Elspeth, who'd created this nightmare trying to do something good. To herself, for all the life she wouldn't get to live. Then she opened her mouth and spoke the incantation. Not the words the spirit expected, the formal acceptance, the ritual surrender, but the other words. The ones written in margins and fever dreams, the ones Elspeth had hidden even from herself, the forbidden incantation. When blood calls to blood and the vessel stands ready, Genevieve's voice rang out, clear and strong despite the cold eating her from within. Speak the words that were and will be. No, the spirit hissed. Those words are not part of the binding. They are— Let the divided become whole, Genevieve continued, feeling power surge through her veins. Her own power, specter power, the accumulated magic of 3 generations breeding true. Let the price be paid in full. The forest erupted in light. Not firelight or moonlight or any natural illumination. This was the light of magic itself, pure and terrible and beautiful. It poured from Genevieve's skin, from her eyes, from her open mouth, as she spoke words that reality itself seemed to strain to contain. Not death for life, but life with life, she shouted over the spirit's screaming protests. 2 flames joined, 1 light. The ground beneath the bench cracked. Not a small crack, a fissure that split the earth like an opening eye, revealing depths that glowed with the same impossible light pouring from Genevieve's body. From those depths rose heat, real heat, summer heat, the warmth of sunlight that Eclipse Manor hadn't felt in 73 years. Eclipse and Spectre, bound by choice! The spirit was shrieking now, trying to pull away, trying to escape the words that were rewriting the spell it had lived within for decades. But it was too late. The incantation had momentum now, power of its own, drawing on every specter who'd come before and every eclipse who'd benefited from their sacrifice. Drawing on Genevieve herself, her blood, her magic, her life force. But not consuming it, transforming it. Not sacrifice, but symbiosis. The light became blinding. Not vessel, but bridge. The spirit's form began to break apart, fragmenting into streaks of gold that shot in every direction, some dissipating into nothing, others flowing toward Marlowe, and toward Genevieve, connecting them. Let the curse complete! No! Lark's scream was anguished. Genevieve, stop! Not in death! The golden streaks wrapped around both of them, boy and woman, eclipse and specter, curse and cure. But in life shared! The spirit gave one final ear-splitting shriek. Then it dispersed, exploded outward in a shower of golden light that painted the trees, the ground, the sky itself. Where the light touched, color returned, real color, vibrant and living. Green leaves, brown earth, blue flowers that hadn't bloomed in the eclipse gardens for 3 generations. The light faded, the screaming stopped, and Genevieve collapsed. She fell forward off the bench, her body suddenly boneless, her eyes rolling back. The incantation had taken everything, every ounce of strength, every reserve of magic, every bit of life force she possessed. Lark caught her before she hit the ground. His vines had dissolved with the spirit's dispersal. He cradled her against his chest, her head lolling against his shoulder, her skin pale as death. No, he whispered. No, 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 Genevieve. Genevieve, stay with me, please. You did it. You broke the curse. You saved him. You can't. But her eyes remained closed, her breathing shallow, her heartbeat faint and irregular. Behind them, Marlowe stirred. The boy sat up slowly, looking around the clearing with eyes that were clear and present and alive. He saw the golden light fading from the trees, saw his father holding Genevieve's limp form, saw the cracks in the earth still glowing faintly with residual magic. And then he screamed. Not in pain, not in fear, in release. 73 years of silence, of stillness, of being trapped between death and life, all of it poured out in that single sound. It was grief and joy and rage and relief all at once. The scream of someone finally allowed to feel everything they'd been denied. The scream of a child who was, at last, truly alive. It echoed through the forest, through the manor grounds, through the very foundations of Eclipse Manor itself. And where the sound touched, the frozen moment shattered. Time resumed. The sun, the real sun, not just faint pink suggestion, began to rise for the first time in 73 years. The forest breathed. And in Lark's arms, Genevieve's eyes fluttered open, just for a moment, just long enough to see his face, to feel his tears falling on her skin.
"Did it work?" she whispered. "Yes," Lark said, his voice breaking.
"Yes, you magnificent, foolish, brave girl. It worked."
"Good." Her eyes drifted closed again. "That's good."
Her head fell to the side. Her breathing stopped.
"Genevieve?"
Lark shook her gently.
"Genevieve, no, you're not allowed to. You can't. Genevieve!"
But she didn't answer. And as the first rays of true sunlight touched Eclipse Manor in 73 years, as the curse shattered and reality remembered how to move forward, as Marlowe stood on shaking legs and took his first steps as a truly living child, King Lark Eclipse held the body of the woman who'd saved them all, and wept. The forest, finally awake after its long sleep, dimmed in sympathy. And somewhere in the distance, a bird sang the first birdsong Eclipse Manor had heard in 3 generations. The sound was heartbreakingly beautiful, and utterly, devastatingly too late. Genevieve's body was too light in his arms. That was what Lark noticed first, in the numb space between her last breath and the realization of what that meant. She weighed nothing, as though she were already more ghost than girl, already slipping away into whatever realm waited beyond. "No," he whispered again, though he knew the word was meaningless. "No, you don't get to do this. You don't get to save us and then just—" Her pendant had come loose during her collapse. It lay against her collarbone, catching the new sunlight, real sunlight, golden and warm and impossible after 73 years of twilight. The symbol engraved on it seemed to pulse with residual magic. A circle containing a crescent moon, wrapped in thorny vines, with a single drop of blood at the center. Lark had seen that symbol before. He'd seen it 73 years ago when Elspeth Spectre had worked her magic, had worn it around her neck as she sealed his infant son in stasis, had clutched it in her dying hand when his ancestor had killed her. No, not his ancestor. The memory crashed over him with the force of revelation, doors in his mind that had been locked for centuries suddenly blown open by the curse's dispersal. Memories he'd buried so deep he'd forgotten they existed. He had killed her. Not King Alaric. There was no King Alaric, just Lark Eclipse, who'd been king for 6 centuries, who'd had so many names, so many identities, that they'd blurred together into convenient fiction, who'd murdered the seer of Moraine with his own hands to keep his secret safe. "Oh, God," he breathed, the horror of recognition turning his voice hollow. "Oh, God, what have I done?" The memories flooded back now, unstoppable. Elspeth finishing the spell, her face gray with exhaustion and blood loss. Baby Marlowe silent in his crib, perfectly preserved, perfectly still. Queen Diana already cold on her deathbed. "It's done," Elspeth had said. "Your son will live. But my lord, you must understand. The price this magic demands is not yet fully paid. In 73 years, when he reaches the age he should have been born, one of my daughters must—" "You told the Queen," Lark had interrupted, his voice deadly quiet. "Before she died, you told Diana what I commanded you to do." Elspeth's face had gone pale. She deserved to know, to understand what her son's life would cost. She died thinking I was a monster. "You are a monster." Elspeth had met his eyes without flinching. "You commanded me to curse your own son, to bind my bloodline to his suffering. You sacrificed everything Diana loved about you, your humanity, your compassion, just to avoid losing him. What else would you call that but monstrous?" Lark's hands had found her throat before he'd consciously decided to move. "I call it love," he'd hissed. "I call it doing whatever necessary to protect what's mine. You wouldn't understand. You've never had a child, never felt that desperate, consuming need to keep them safe at any cost." Elspeth had clawed at his hands, gasping, "I have a daughter who will forget you by morning, just like everyone else." Lark had squeezed harder. "The curse you wove, it erases those who touch my son. You said so yourself. So once I kill you, once your hands have blessed and cursed him, you'll vanish. No one will remember. No one will know what I commanded, what I did. They'll know." Elspeth had choked. "The diary, I wrote, I'll burn it, burn everything. There will be no evidence of Elspeth's specter beyond dusty records no one reads." He'd felt her pulse fluttering against his palms like a trapped bird. "And I'll make sure your daughter, your bloodline, never learns the truth. They'll think you died a hero, a martyr, not a woman who was murdered for the crime of showing me my own reflection." Elspeth's eyes had held his, even as the light faded from them, and in that dying gaze, Lark had seen something that haunted him for 73 years. Pity. Not hatred, not fear, just profound, devastating pity for what he'd become. Her last words had been barely a whisper. "Your son will hate you for this." Then she'd gone limp in his hands, and by morning, just as he'd predicted, no one remembered her name. Lark's vision blurred. He looked down at Genevieve, at Elspeth's descendant, at the girl who'd been bred by curse and bloodline to finish what her ancestor started. The girl he'd let walk into his manor, let approach his son, let sacrifice herself, just like he'd let Elspeth sacrifice herself 73 years ago. "I'm sorry," he whispered to her unhearing ears. "I'm so sorry. I thought I'd changed, thought I'd learned. But I'm still the same monster who killed your—" "You are!" The voice came from everywhere and nowhere. Lark's head snapped up. The ancestral spirit stood at the edge of the clearing, but it had changed. No longer the raging, shadow-crowned thing that had burst from Marlowe's chest. Now it appeared almost human, a woman's form, translucent and softly glowing, wearing the face of every specter who'd ever lived, wearing Elspeth's face most strongly. "You thought I was dispersed," the spirit said, moving closer with steps that made no sound. "That the incantation destroyed me, but you misunderstood, as you always do." "What are you?" Lark demanded, though part of him already knew. "I am the accumulated magic of the specter bloodline. The spell Elspeth wove wasn't just to save your son. It was to ensure that when the truth finally came to light, there would be a judge, a witness, a voice for those you erased." The spirit knelt beside Genevieve's body, its translucent hand hovering over her still face. She completed the incantation, reformed the curse from sacrifice to symbiosis, saved your son, and freed this kingdom from the frozen moment you created.
But the price, the spirit's voice cracked with grief. The price was still too high.
Then take me instead, Lark said desperately. She's given enough. They've all given enough. If blood must be paid, take mine. I'm the one who murdered Elspeth? The spirit's eyes, Elspeth's eyes, fixed on him with terrible knowing. Yes, we know. We've always known. The curse remembered even when you didn't. It recorded your sin and passed it down through generations, waiting for this moment. Lark felt his chest constrict. Then punish me, destroy me, but let her live. I cannot. The spirit's form flickered. She spent everything to rewrite the spell, her life force, her magic, her very essence, all of it poured into the incantation. I can hold her here, at the edge of death, for a few moments more, but I cannot bring her back. That was her choice, her sacrifice. No, the word was torn from Lark's throat. There has to be another way. There's always— There isn't. The spirit stood, and now other forms appeared beside it, ghostly figures emerging from the forest. Lark recognized some of them. Queen Diana, ethereal and sad. The servants who'd touched Marlowe over the years, their faces familiar but nameless. And others, going back centuries. All the people the Eclipse bloodline had consumed in their desperate quest for immortality. Do you want to know the truth? The spirit asked. The real truth, buried beneath centuries of convenient lies? I already know the truth. I'm a monster who killed— No, deeper than that, older than that. The spirit raised one hand, and the air shimmered. A vision appeared, ancient, primal, almost too bright to look at directly. A man standing on a mountain peak at the world's edge, where the sun first touched the earth each dawn. Not Lark, someone older. The first eclipse. In his hands, he held a chalice filled with liquid that glowed like captured starlight. I will not die, the first eclipse declared to the uncaring sky. I will not fade like lesser things. I will consume eternity itself and remake the world in my image. He drank. The celestial blood, for that's what it was, stolen from something beyond mortal comprehension, burned through him, changed him, made him something new and terrible and undying. But the price— The sun, which had been rising, stopped, froze at the edge of the horizon, caught between night and day, and across the world, dusk fell, permanent, unending. What have you done? A voice cried. A woman, his wife, his love. The sun won't rise. You've trapped us in twilight. I've trapped us in forever, the first eclipse corrected, already changing, already becoming something that needed blood instead of food, darkness instead of light. And you should thank me. Now we'll never have to say goodbye, never have to grow old, never have to— But his wife was backing away, horror on her face. You've broken the world, she whispered. Stolen the sun to feed your fear of death. And for what? So you could live forever in darkness? She'd run then, fled into the frozen twilight. The first eclipse had followed, driven by love and rage and desperate need to make her understand. And when he caught her— well, the first vampire had to feed on something. The vision faded. Lark stood trembling, the truth crushing him like physical weight. The eclipse bloodline. We're why the sun stopped rising, why the world lives in eternal twilight, why everything is broken, the spirit finished. Yes, Your ancestor consumed celestial blood and trapped reality in stasis. Every eclipse since has perpetuated that sin, feeding on others to sustain their unnatural existence. Your son's curse was just the latest manifestation of the original crime. You birthed eternity without love, another voice said. Marlowe stood at the clearing's edge, his small frame silhouetted against the rising sun, the sun that was finally rising again, freed by the curse's breaking. He looked different, older somehow, though only minutes had passed. His silver eyes held knowledge that no child should possess. "The spirit showed me," Marlowe said, walking forward. "While you held Genevieve, it showed me everything, what you did, what our family did, the price everyone else paid for our immortality." "Marlowe," Lark's voice broke. "Son, I never wanted you to know you're a murderer?" The boy's tone wasn't accusing, just sad, infinitely sad. "I know now. I know you killed the seer. Know you've been lying about who you are for centuries. Know that Genevieve's death is just one more body in a pile that stretches back to the world's beginning." He knelt beside Genevieve's body, his small hand finding hers. "But I also know why." Marlowe looked up at his father with eyes that held more understanding than condemnation. "You were afraid. Of death. Of loss. Of being alone. So you built walls of immortality and called it strength. You killed to protect your secrets and called it necessity. You watched people die and called it—" His voice cracked. "Called it love." Lark sank to his knees, unable to support his own weight anymore. "Marlowe, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Everything I did, everything I am, I just wanted to keep you safe, to protect you from the world I'd created. I thought if I could just punish me instead." The words hung in the air like thunder. The spirit's form sharpened, focusing entirely on the boy. "What did you say?" "Punish me instead of him." Marlowe stood, still holding Genevieve's hand. "I'm an eclipse too. I benefited from the curse, from Genevieve's sacrifice, from everyone's sacrifice. So if someone has to pay the final price, if this is about justice, then take me." "No!" Lark lunged forward, but invisible force held him back. "Not him! Never him! Take me! I'm the one who loved me," Marlowe finished quietly. "Who made terrible choices because he couldn't bear to lose me, who became a monster trying to be a father." He looked at the spirit with heartbreaking clarity. "Punish me. Let him live with what he's done. That's the real punishment anyway." The spirit was silent for a long moment. Then, impossibly, it smiled. "There," it said softly. "There is the crack where light gets in. Compassion from the bloodline that has shown none for centuries. Love that asks for nothing in return. Sacrifice offered freely, not demanded or stolen." It looked at Lark, still held immobile by magic. "Your son shames you," it said, "shows you what you should have been, what you could have been if you'd chosen love over fear." "I know," Lark whispered. "I know." "Do you?" The spirit drifted closer. "Because I think you still don't understand. You think this story ends with punishment, with justice, with someone paying the price your bloodline owes." It shook its head. "But that's not how curses break. Not really. They don't end in punishment. They end when the pattern changes, when someone finally makes a different choice." The spirit placed both hands on Marlowe's head, a gesture like benediction. "Elspeth's daughter grew up without a mother, had children who had children who had children, all carrying the burden of a curse they didn't understand, all taught to see themselves as less than the eclipse bloodline, as servants, as vessels, as sacrifices. It turned to Genevieve's body. Until this one, who looked at a cursed child and saw not a prince or a duty, but just a boy who was cold, who touched him not because she was commanded, but because she cared, who rewrote the spell not to destroy or claim victory, but to create something new. The spirit began to glow brighter. She chose differently, and her choice unmade the pattern, unmade the curse, unmade the original sin. Then save her, Lark pleaded. If the curse is broken, if the pattern is changed, let her live, please. I cannot give life. I am not that kind of magic. The spirit's form started to dissolve at the edges, unraveling like mist in sunlight. But I can give her this. She will be remembered. Every specter who was erased, returned to memory. Every sacrifice acknowledged. Every death mourned. Its voice grew fainter. The eclipse bloodline stole the sun. But she gave it back. Let that be remembered. Let that be... The spirit dispersed. Not violently like before. Gently, peacefully, dissolving into particles of light that drifted upward into the brightening sky, joining the sunrise that painted the world in gold and rose. Where the light particles touched, things changed. The frozen forest began to shift and grow, real growth, real change. The manor grounds remembered seasons. Flowers that hadn't bloomed in 73 years opened their petals, and across the kingdom, from the lowest servant's hovel to the highest noble's estate, people woke with tears on their faces and names on their lips. Names they'd forgotten, people they'd lost, loved ones erased by the curse. They remembered. All of them. Everything. The curse evaporated like mist in morning light. But in the clearing, Genevieve still lay motionless in Lark's arms. "Please," he whispered to the empty air, to the departed spirit, to gods who'd abandoned this world centuries ago. "Please don't let it end like this. Not after everything. Not after she—" Genevieve's body began to glow, soft at first, then brighter. The same golden light that had dispersed the spirit, now emanating from her skin, her hair, her closed eyes. She was fading. Not dying, she was already dead, or near enough. Just fading. Becoming light herself, becoming memory and magic, and everything she'd spent in the spell. "No," Marlowe breathed, clutching her hand tighter. "No, you're supposed to wake up. You're supposed to—" But the light grew brighter, more translucent. Through Genevieve's form, Lark could see the moss-covered bench, the cracked earth, the new growth pushing up through soil that had been frozen for generations. She was becoming part of it, part of the world's healing. "Genevieve!" Lark said her name like a prayer, like an apology, like all the words he should have said when she could still hear them. "Thank you. For saving him. For saving all of us. For being brave enough to choose differently than I ever did." The last of her solid form dissolved. And for just a moment, one perfect, impossible moment, the golden light shaped itself into her face, opened eyes that were now made of sunshine and smiled. "You're welcome," the smile seemed to say. "Now do better." Then she was gone. Just light scattering on the morning breeze. Just memory fading into the dawn. Just a girl who'd touched a cursed prince and changed the world, leaving nothing behind but the echo of her warmth. Lark Eclipse, who had lived for 6 centuries, who had killed and lied and broken the world to avoid loss, finally learned how to cry. He knelt in the clearing with his son, both of them weeping in the first true sunrise their kingdom had seen in 600 years, and felt the weight of every sin, every death, every terrible choice crash down on him at once. There would be no punishment, no dramatic justice, just this, living with what he'd done, living with what he'd lost, living with the knowledge that the girl who'd saved them all had deserved so much more than to be erased by his family's curse. Marlowe's small hand found his father's. "We have to do better," the boy said, echoing Genevieve's final message. "We have to be better than what we were." Lark looked at his son, truly alive now, truly free, and nodded. "We will," he promised. "We will." It was the only apology he could offer, the only redemption he could seek, and as the sun climbed higher, warming a world that had forgotten what daylight felt like, the last traces of golden light drifted upward and vanished into the blue, blue sky, leaving behind only hope and the terrible, beautiful burden of trying to deserve it. The light came slowly at first, a pale line along the eastern horizon, barely distinguishable from the twilight that had held dominion for so long. Lark knelt in the clearing, still holding the space where Genevieve had been, his hands cupped around empty air that felt somehow warm. Beside him, Marlowe stood transfixed, his small face turned toward the sky. "Father," the boy whispered. "Father, what's happening to the darkness?" "It's ending," Lark said, his voice hoarse from weeping. "After 600 years, it's finally ending." The pale line brightened, deepened. Colors began to emerge, rose and gold, and shades of amber that had existed only in ancient paintings, in fading memories, in stories told by those too old to remember if they were true. The sun was rising, really rising, not the false promises of pink that had teased them days before, not the frozen instant where dawn and dusk had blurred into eternal in-between, but actual, undeniable, unstoppable sunrise. From the manor, screams began. Lark's head snapped toward the sound. Through the trees, he could see the upper windows of Eclipse Manor catching the light, golden rays spilling through glass that had reflected only moonlight and starlight for centuries. And inside those windows, shapes moved, panicked, desperate. The vampires. "The court," Lark breathed, understanding crashing over him. "The undead nobles. They're—" A figure burst from the manor's eastern door, running full tilt toward the forest's shadows. Lord Corvain, one of the oldest vampires in the court, his face twisted in terror as sunlight chased him across the grounds. He almost made it to the tree line. Almost. The sun's rays caught him mid-stride. For a moment, nothing happened. Then his skin began to smoke. Not dramatically, no flames, no spectacular immolation, just a slow, inevitable dissolution. His body turned gray, then silver, then translucent. By the time he collapsed, he was already more ash than flesh. The wind caught his remains and scattered them across the garden. More screams erupted from the manor, more vampires fled, some toward the forest, others toward the wine cellars, the crypts, anywhere the sun couldn't reach. But the light was relentless. It poured through windows, under doors, through cracks in stone that had seemed solid for centuries. Some of the undead nobles fell where they stood. Others made it to darkness and huddled there, weeping or raging or simply silent with shock. But some, a handful of vampires emerged from the manor's main entrance and stood in the courtyard as the sun rose higher. They didn't run, didn't hide, just stood with their faces turned upward, waiting. Lark recognized Lady Thorngate among them. She'd been vampire for 300 years, had forgotten what warmth felt like, what color looked like under natural light. Now she closed her eyes as the sun touched her face. "Finally," Lark heard her whisper across the distance. Finally, an ending. She dissolved into silver ash with something like a smile on her face. One by one, the vampires who'd chosen to stand in the light did the same, becoming ash, becoming memory, becoming nothing but dust on the morning breeze. "They're dying," Marlowe said, clutching his father's hand. "The light is killing them." "No." Lark pulled his son closer, though his own skin had begun to tingle where sunlight touched it. "They're choosing. Some are running because they fear change more than eternal twilight. Others are embracing it because they're tired. So tired of being what they've become." "Will you die too?" It was a child's question, blunt and afraid, and desperately needing reassurance. Lark looked down at his own hands. They were smoking slightly at the edges, the same gray pallor creeping in that he'd seen on Lord Corvain. But it was slow, hesitant, as though the sun itself wasn't sure what to make of him. "I don't know," he admitted. "I'm older than most of them, stronger, but I'm still what the first eclipse made us, creatures of darkness sustained by stolen life. The sun should destroy me." "I don't want you to die," Marlowe's voice cracked. "Please, I just got you back. I just got to really know you. You can't—" "Shh." Lark knelt so he was eye level with his son. "Whatever happens, you'll be all right. You're not like me. You're half mortal. Diana's son as much as mine. The sun won't hurt you." "But it'll hurt you." "Perhaps, or perhaps—" Lark trailed off, noticing something strange. The smoking had stopped. His hands, which had been turning gray at the edges, were solidifying again. Not quite their original pallor. There was more color now, more warmth, but not dissolving either. He looked up at the sun, now fully visible above the horizon, and felt its light wash over him like water. It burned. God, it burned. But not with the destruction he'd expected. With transformation. "Father?" Marlowe's voice was small. "You're changing." Lark stood slowly, watching his own skin in wonder. The deathly pale complexion he'd worn for 6 centuries was warming, becoming something closer to living flesh. His hands, which had been cold for so long he'd forgotten what warmth felt like, grew warm. His heart, which had beaten maybe once per hour for 6 centuries, began to speed up. 2 beats, 3, 10, settling into a rhythm that was almost. "I don't understand," he breathed. But even as he said it, he did understand. The curse that had trapped the world in twilight, that had been woven by the first eclipse's theft of celestial blood, was broken. Elspeth's spell, rewritten by Genevieve's sacrifice, hadn't just freed Marlowe, it had freed everything. Unwoven the original sin that had frozen the sun, and without that foundational curse, vampires were becoming something else. Not mortal, not entirely, but no longer the pure undead things they'd been. Something in between, something new. Around the manor grounds, Lark saw others experiencing the same transformation. Vampires who'd survived the initial sunlight, who hadn't chosen dissolution or fled to darkness, were changing. Their skin warming, their eyes losing that flat, predatory gleam, becoming more alive and less eternal with each passing moment. "The world is healing," Marlowe said, wonder in his voice. "And it's healing you too." From the forest a sound emerged that Lark hadn't heard in 6 centuries. Birdsong. Real birdsong. Not the occasional crow or night hunter, but a full chorus of morning birds welcoming the sun. The sound swelled and spread, joined by rustling leaves as wind. Real wind, not the stale air of the frozen moment, moved through branches. The forest's illusions shattered like glass. One moment the trees were still the repeating pattern Genevieve and Marlowe had discovered. The next, they were distinct, unique. Each one its own shape, its own story, its own particular way of reaching toward the light. The moss-covered bench where Genevieve had disappeared was covered now in tiny white flowers, blooming instantaneously as the sun's warmth touched them. The pool at their feet reflected not the sky, but real clouds moving across blue that seemed impossibly vibrant after so much gray. Everything was becoming real again, becoming what it should have been all along. "Is this death?" Marlowe asked suddenly, his voice trembling as he stared at the transformation happening around them. Lark pulled his son close, wrapping his arms around the boy who was finally, truly alive. "No, my son, it is life, real life, the kind that grows and changes and ends, yes, but the kind that means something because it does." "I'm scared," Marlowe admitted against his father's chest. "So am I." "But also happy?" Lark finished. "Yes." Marlowe pulled back enough to look up at the sun. "Is it supposed to be this beautiful?"
It almost hurts to look at.
"It's supposed to be exactly this beautiful. And it hurts because we forgot, because we lived so long in the dark that light became foreign, dangerous. But Marlowe," Lark turned his son's face toward his own, "we can remember now. We can relearn, together." The boy's eyes, still silver but warmer now, searched his father's face. "Without Genevieve?" The name hit like a physical blow. Lark looked at the space where she'd dissolved into light. The flowers that had bloomed there were spreading, covering the ground in white and gold. In the center, where her body had lain, something glinted. He moved closer, Marlowe's hand in his. It was her pendant, the one with the specter symbol, circle and crescent moon and thorny vines. It lay on a bed of white petals, somehow untouched by her transformation. And beside it, something else. A single feather made of light. Not real light. This was something more. Something that looked like solidified sunshine, golden and radiant, and impossibly delicate. "What is it?" Marlowe whispered. Lark picked up the feather carefully. It was warm to the touch and weighed nothing. When he held it up to the sun, the light passed through it, casting rainbow fractals across the ground. "A gift," he said quietly, "from Genevieve, or from what she became. A reminder that she was real, that she mattered, that she—" His voice broke. The feather began to glow brighter. Then impossibly, it multiplied, splitting into 2 feathers, then 4, then 8. They rose from his palm on a wind that came from nowhere, swirling around Lark and Marlowe in a spiral of light. Where each feather touched the ground, more flowers bloomed. Where they touched the trees, new growth sprouted. Where they touched the sky, they became light itself, scattering across the heavens like stars visible even in daylight. Genevieve's body had become silver ash and scattered. But her essence, her magic, her sacrifice, her love, was literally remaking the world, pouring life back into everything the Eclipse curse had drained. The feathers spread across Eclipse Manor, across the gardens, across the kingdom beyond, touching everything with gentle transformation. And where they touched vampires who'd survived the sunrise, the change accelerated. The warmth spread. The humanity returned. Not all of them would survive it. Some were too old, too far gone into undeath. They dissolved peacefully, finally allowed to rest after centuries of stolen life. But others, the younger ones, the ones who'd been turned recently enough to remember mortality, they transformed, became something that could exist in daylight, something that could grow and change and eventually die, but also truly live. Lark felt it happening to himself, felt 6 centuries of accumulated death sloughing away like a snake's shed skin. He was still vampire in some essential way. The strength remained, the longevity, the heightened senses. But he was also mortal again, vulnerable, capable of death, capable of life. "Father," Marlowe said, pointing toward the manor, "look." The building itself was transforming. The gray stone was warming to honey gold. Windows that had been dark for decades suddenly showed candlelight, lamplight, firelight within. Ivy that had grown wild and dead was greening, flowering, climbing the walls in vibrant cascades. Eclipse Manor was waking up, and with it, the people inside. The servants who'd lived in perpetual twilight, their days blurring together, their memories fragmenting. They were emerging into the courtyard, shading their eyes against the light, weeping and laughing, and simply standing in wonder. Thomas the groundskeeper fell to his knees in the garden, his weathered face turned up to the sun, tears streaming down his cheeks. Meredith stood in the doorway, her hand over her heart, whispering the name of someone she'd forgotten. A sister, Lark realized, who'd touched Marlowe 40 years ago and been erased. She was remembering. They were all remembering. The spell was truly, completely broken. Lark sank to his knees in the clearing, overwhelmed. Marlowe knelt beside him, the boy's small hand finding his father's larger one. Together, they watched the sun climb higher, watched the world come alive, watched the last of Genevieve's light feathers scatter across the kingdom, carrying her gift to every corner that had known darkness. "She saved everyone," Marlowe said softly. "Not just me, everyone." "Yes. Will we ever see her again?" Lark looked at the flowers blooming where she'd lain, at the light still dancing in the air, at the pendant that held her family's symbol. I think she's everywhere now, in every sunrise, every flower, every moment of warmth and growth and life. She became the healing itself." "That's beautiful," Marlowe said, "but also sad." "Yes," Lark agreed, "both things at once, like most beautiful things are." They sat in silence as the morning deepened. Around them, the kingdom continued its transformation. Birds Lark hadn't seen in centuries returned to the trees. Flowers that existed only in ancient botanical texts bloomed in the gardens. The sky cycled through shades of blue that had names he'd forgotten. Reality was reasserting itself. Time was moving forward again. And Lark Eclipse, who had lived 600 years in frozen twilight, who had killed to avoid loss, who had broken the world rather than face his own fear, finally let himself feel the full weight of what he'd done, and what Genevieve had undone. Tears fell from his eyes, warm, human tears that would have been impossible days ago. They ran down his changing face, and where they fell, they left marks. Not scars exactly, but something visible, something permanent. Evidence that he had wept, that he had felt, that he had finally, after centuries of numbed existence, allowed himself to be human enough to grieve. "I'm sorry," he whispered, to Genevieve, to Elspeth, to Diana, to every person his bloodline had consumed in its quest for immortality. "I'm so sorry." The light didn't answer, but it didn't need to. Its presence was answer enough. Marlowe leaned against his father's side, both of them kneeling in the clearing as the morning sun painted everything gold. The boy's warmth seeped through Lark's clothes, his breathing steady and real and alive. "What do we do now?" Marlowe asked. Lark looked at his son, at the child who'd been frozen for 73 years and was now truly, finally free, at the kingdom waking around them, at the sunrise that had returned after 6 centuries of absence. "We do better," he said, echoing Genevieve's final message. "We live. We grow. We remember what was sacrificed so we could have this chance, and we try, every single day, to be worthy of it." "That sounds hard." "It will be. Probably the hardest thing we've ever done. But we'll do it together?" Lark pulled his son close, pressing a kiss to the top of his head. "Together. Always." They stood as the sun climbed higher, father and son silhouetted against the light. Behind them, Eclipse Manor gleamed in its transformation, no longer a monument to frozen time, but a living place again, a home. The last of Genevieve's light feathers drifted past them, carried on the morning breeze. Lark reached out and let one settle on his palm. It was warm and weightless and impossibly bright. Then it dissolved into pure light and sank into his skin, leaving behind only a gentle warmth. A blessing. A forgiveness he didn't deserve, but was being offered anyway. "Thank you," he whispered to the woman who'd become the dawn itself. "Thank you for showing us what we could be, what we should have been all along." The light seemed to pulse in response, and somewhere in the distance, so faint it might have been imagination, Lark thought he heard Genevieve's voice. "You're welcome. Now live, really live, for all of us who couldn't." Then even that faded, leaving only the sound of birds and wind and the gentle rustling of a world that was, finally, properly alive. The Vampire King's horror was never that his son might be destroyed. It was that someone dared to heal him, dared to prove that the walls of protocol and fear he'd built were unnecessary, that protection through isolation was just another word for abandonment, that the price he'd been too afraid to pay, the price of being vulnerable, of being human, of risking loss, was actually the only price that mattered. Genevieve Spectre had walked into Eclipse Manor and touched a cursed prince with compassion instead of fear. And in doing so, she'd broken not just the spell that held him frozen, but the deeper curse that had trapped an entire bloodline in the space between death and life. She'd given them back the sun, given them back time, given them back the terrible, beautiful gift of mortality, the knowledge that every moment mattered because there would eventually be a last moment. And Lark Eclipse, kneeling in the morning light with his son's hand in his, finally understood what it meant to be truly alive. Not the absence of death, but the presence of things worth dying for, worth living for, worth changing for. The horror had ended, and in its place, for the first time in 6 centuries, was something that felt almost like hope.